Hello everyone. Before we get into this episode, it's important for you to remember to be empathetic and understanding for every single guest that I have on this show. If you enjoy this content, please make sure to subscribe and follow because I do release weekly videos every single week. Otherwise, enjoy the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today's guest has been someone I have really been looking forward to getting on the show for a long time, really since I started the show. He was previously the head coach of Misfits Gaming, rebranded into the Florida Mayhem for Season 1 and part of Season 2. He is now a content creator and private coach. Please let me introduce Vytis Lasaitis, maybe better known as Mineral. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Blake. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to have you on the show. We have a lot to talk about. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm liking your content. That's one of the things that we'll start off first is you're starting to do content. I hope you keep it up because right now that's like the first thing that I judge every content creator by is how long they actually keep it going. It's been really good though. I think that it's been really widely receptive. But one of the things I want to start off very easily with a kind of easier question. You had mentioned that you were into journalism and that you actually have a journalism background, which we're going to dive way more into kind of later on. But with that being said, if you had to look at the landscape of journalism now, who is a journalist that you really kind of look up to and admire right now?
That's a good question because I think in kind of a large scale, I think journalism is kind of like the modern journalism is completely different from what it was. And it was sort of already in that transitional period when I was getting my degree. So I think today's journalism, there's not a lot of people you can look up to in terms of like investigative journalists or anything like that. I've always been kind of into sports, and what I wanted to do with journalism was being a sports journalist. So sort of the people that I look up to are journalists who mostly NBA journalists because that's what I followed the most. So Zach Lowe, especially for his writing and for his podcasting. Also Bill Simmons, I think, is obviously a legend, a sports legend. So he's terrific. And yeah, I think those guys are two guys who I constantly follow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what I was asking you is, what is one thing that you kind of look for in these people that really makes them stand out as good writers that you would want to take for yourself?
Well, I just think they have versatility. And I think in modern journalism, you need to be versatile. You can't just come in as a good writer and expect to have a successful career. I think you have to be able to do podcasts. You have to be able to be on video. You have to be able to write. You know, all of these mediums you have to be good at, or at least sort of develop skills in if you want to be successful. And I think that's what they have, especially Bill Simmons. You know, he's a terrific writer. He has a very I guess peculiar writing style in terms of it's kind of conversational. It's easy to digest. So it's it's kind of it's just kind of the versatility. And then as far as his podcasts go, I love that he has kind of a conversational type of style where, again, it's very easy to digest. You don't have to like sit down and listen to it. You just listen to it on the go. And I think those guys are very, very skilled.
Yeah, I know that for like me, when I was looking at doing like podcasts, like there was definitely people who like stood out, and like Joe Rogan is one who I always like to watch, but like actually Howard Stern was someone like I don't really appreciate a lot of his like jokes just because I don't find the crude humor that funny. But like his actual interviews were always something that I was quite amazed by when he would interview people and talk to them, and they would just start telling him things like it was a conversation between two people. So those are like people that I always gravitate to, and I can kind of appreciate their different styles and the way that they would approach things going in here. So that kind of brings me up to my next question. You have a very interesting name, and one of the things that I kind of looked up on you is that it says that you're from both Sweden and Lithuanian, but your last name is definitely Lithuanian. So did you grow up mostly in Lithuania? And I probably said that wrong just because it's a little bit of a tongue twister, or did you grow up in Sweden?
So I grew up in Lithuania. Until I was like 8 years old. I sort of moved around quite a bit. And then when I was 8 years old, my mom she had already moved to Sweden a couple of years prior, and then she took me to Sweden. So I lived in Sweden pretty much since I was, 8.5 or so, until my late teens when I finished school. And then I went to university in the UK. So I moved to the UK when I was maybe 18 or 19. And then I came back to Sweden after that. And then obviously the esports life took me all over the world.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Lithuania. You mentioned that you lived there till you were 8. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a half sister. My parents are divorced. They divorced sort of around the time when I moved. So it was kind of a tug of war in terms of where I would go and things like that. But I never had a brother or sister growing up, so I only have a half sister from my dad's side, who obviously came along after the divorce. So it's not, because I don't spend a lot of time in Lithuania. She's not someone I'm very close to, really. So she's obviously a half sibling, but yeah, I don't really have a sibling that I grew up with.
Okay, so what was it like growing up there then?
In Lithuania?
Yeah.
Lithuania was fine. I think it was my childhood, I guess, was quite fun. I lived very close to the daycare where you would stay until you start school. After that, I obviously went. I went the first year of school in my home city, and then for year 2, actually, because my mom was already gone, my dad took me with him, so I had to switch schools and kind of uproot myself and go to and live in another city for year 2. I stayed there for maybe like 5 months, and then once again my mom took me, uprooted me once again. Then I moved to Sweden. So sort of in this kind of cycle of 1.5 years, I moved, or like 2 years, I moved schools and like had to find new friends and all that, like maybe 4 times. So it was a bit tough, I guess. Up until that point, up until starting school, it wasn't anything special. I lived a fine life. I went out with friends and played, and it was all good. But yeah, I think sort of transitioning to that period, it got kind of harder. But yeah, I don't remember too much about Lithuania because I was very young. So yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your parents got divorced, and it sounds like when you described like the back and forth moving, it sounds like you were probably right around 5 or 6 when they divorced. Or was
no, I think I was already 8 when they divorced. My mom moved to Sweden when I was 7, right when I was about to start school, because she was gonna do her PhD here, and she couldn't do it in Lithuania, and she got a lot of funding to do that. So as she pursued that, she came by and visited every once in a while, but obviously she was very busy. So I kind of just lived with my grandma because my dad was also in another city. So basically, I just kind of grew up with my grandma, and then because they were kind of separated, I don't know really what was going on behind the scenes, but eventually, I guess the divorce materialized when I was 8.5, maybe something like that.
So you said that you lived with your grandma primarily growing up. What's your grandma like?
Well, my grandma is sort of one of the sweetest people I know. Like she's really the most selfless person I know, and I think she kind of instilled some of those qualities in me. Now she's obviously a lot older. She's she's suffering with kind of the diseases and all that stuff that all old people suffer from. So it is kind of challenging to see someone sort of, I don't want to say like disappearing, but like not being the same person you knew. But sort of when I grew up, again, she was super selfless. She always put everyone, not just myself, but she put everyone's needs in front of her own. And that's kind of the person she was, and that's why I sort of was very happy growing up. She took care of me very, very well. So that first year of school, and as I was growing up, I was very happy.
That must have made it really hard when your parents are actually divorcing them, because you have this really stable foundation in your life with your grandma, who sounds like an amazing human being. And then suddenly you have to, like, one day you're moving to your dad's. What was that like for you?
It was weird because I didn't really have a say about it. My dad just kind of came around and he was like, well, we're moving, you're coming to live with me. And I'm like, okay. I was kind of scared, a little bit scared of my dad at that point. Like, he was the authoritative figure, I guess, who I didn't really see that much. Maybe he came around every once in a while on weekends, but he wasn't really there, and I was a little afraid of him. So I wasn't too happy about moving, but I didn't really have a say about it. So it was weird. I think the hardest part was just like for the third time, because you go from daycare, you have your friend circle there, and then you go to first year of school where you have a different you have to like kind of rebuild that foundation, and then immediately after, as soon as you feel comfortable there, you have to move again. So from kind of a social side of things, I think it was very difficult, and also not having my grandma there as kind of a support person supporting me. So I think I kind of became a little more introverted when I moved in with my dad, because I was just kind of I guess I was shocked because of how much change there was in my life.
Mm-hmm. So when that happens, when you move all these different times, you mentioned that the social aspect kind of got hit, and that you became more introverted. What did that kind of look like? Was it just you not willing to hang out with people? Did people not really get along with you because of you just couldn't socialize? Like, what did it look like?
No, I think people liked me. Actually, I did make friends, but it was just, I don't know, it was weird. I guess more so than when I moved with my dad. I think it was more so when I moved to Sweden when you could really see that, because that was again like the third or the fourth time where I had to do the same thing. But now I'm moving to a country where I don't speak the country, so I can't really even make friends, and I have to go to class with other students who don't speak the language. So I'm kind of falling behind in school. And I picked up the language pretty quickly, but for some reason I just wouldn't talk with anyone. I could speak it. There was one friend that I had privately who I spoke to, and he was sort of the only person who knew what I sounded like, because he was the only one who I actually spoke to. And when I was in class to get attention, I was sort of banging a pen against the table, if I needed assistance from the teacher or whatever. So I don't know. Reflecting back, I really don't know what was going on in my head. What I was thinking, why that happened. It was sort of probably just kind of a traumatic mental block or something that eventually, after a year, I just overcame. And then I, the teacher started complaining about me never shutting up, and rather than kind of not talking, because people are worried. Everyone, they know that I can speak the language, I can write, everything's fine, but I'm just not speaking. But I can't really explain why it was, but I think it was sort of just kind of a traumatic transition overall.
Mm-hmm. So that transition from your dad's to moving to Sweden, was that something that was also kind of just sprung upon you one day? You find out that, hey, you're moving to Sweden.
Yeah, that was one of the only memories I have from living with my dad. Was when I was for some reason the teacher told me to kind of stay back in class after everyone left. And I kind of just sat around and didn't know what was going on. And then sort of someone opened the door who sort of looked like my mom. But I was like, in my mind, I'm like, well, there's no way it's my mom. I haven't seen her in forever. She's in Sweden. There's no way that's her. So I kind of didn't even, it sort of registered. But I'm like, no, it's impossible that it's her. And then she kind of came forward. It was very emotional. And she took me out to kind of have tea or whatever and talk about things. And she asked me, like, where would you want to go? Like, are you happy here? I would love to take you with me to Sweden. I was like, yeah, I do want to move in with you. I do want to live with you, because I feel like I wasn't that happy living over there. So, that's So it was definitely sprung upon me, and again, in a very shocking way, because my mom just appeared out of nowhere. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And then I have to, at 8 years old, kind of give my take, even though obviously I'm in no position to decide.
Yeah.
They still kind of asked what I wanted, which is, but again, for an 8-year-old, that's an insane responsibility to bear, And I think, it was a weird period.
Yeah, I remember, because my parents divorced when I was around 6, and I remember a judge actually asking me and my brother, hey, where do you guys want to live? And even to this day, I think, what the hell were they thinking? Like, how is this a sane rationale for any adult to have? Let's just ask the 8-year-old, right, where the fuck they want to live. So one of the things you kind of talked about, you mentioned that being put in this decision, and it being it's not an easy decision, and you don't really know the ramifications, right? Being 8, you're not like, what are the ramifications of this decision? But one of the things you kind of mentioned is that you weren't feeling very happy. What do you think it was at that time that you weren't really happy about?
I think I was just kind of used a little bit to being coddled, I guess. My grandma always took care of everything I wanted. She did, I don't want to say like she did what I asked her, but like if there's something I wanted, she would always give stuff to me, like any grandma would, And moving in with just my dad, I felt like I didn't really have that aspect, which as a kid, that's what you want. When you're a kid, you're like a little dog. You want snacks. You want to be coddled, right? So I think it was probably mostly that, and because growing up, I didn't really hang out with my dad that much, so it didn't really feel like I knew him that well. It was it was kind of weird in that sense.
Mm-hmm. So you end up moving over to Sweden. What did it look like? Like, she comes there, she's like, oh, where do you want to go? How long did it take? Was it like that same day you were on a plane to Sweden? Like, what did that transition look like?
A good question. I actually don't remember, but it was pretty quick. I think it happened within like a month. Obviously, there's paperwork and all that type of stuff that has to be taken care of. I do remember that I went to school for a little longer before everything was settled. And I remember it was already sort of the kids in the class already knew that I was leaving ahead of time, because I vaguely remember getting like as I was leaving these these notes or whatever from other class members, like nice notes or whatever, well wishes and things like that. So yeah, I think it maybe roughly a month it took before everything was finalized.
Okay, so you end up moving to Sweden. You don't speak the language right away. What is that experience like, going into some place where you don't speak the language at all? And believe it or not, this is actually kind of reminiscent if you look at Overwatch League teams, which is kind of why I want to bring it up. Because if you think about it, a lot of teams end up having split rosters with different nationalities, and they don't speak the language. And a lot of times it's their first time in a new culture. So what was it like for you, being 8, hitting a new culture that you did not speak the language to?
Yeah, like I said, I think it was just pretty traumatic. I didn't really know what to do or how to make friends or anything. And, it's difficult to say. I don't really remember how I felt. And that's why, even as I think back on that time, I can't really rationalize why I didn't speak for a year. And it's not like I didn't speak. That was afraid, of making mistakes. But I guess within a year, I could speak almost perfect Swedish with one of my best friends, like one of the only friends that I made during that year. And he was like, dude, why are you not talking? Like, your Swedish is perfect. Are you ashamed or something? I'm like, no, I'm not ashamed. I don't know. Like, I can't. Even there's something there, And so, yeah, I think it's difficult to say how I felt at that time. I don't really know, but that was those are, I suppose, sort of the ramifications of the whole thing.
Yeah. So kind of growing up in Sweden, now you're in Sweden. What is Sweden like in comparative to Lithuania? Like, is there any differences? Are there similarities? What are the two countries like?
I mean, the living standard is obviously a lot higher. It's different politics as well. Sweden, notoriously is a very socialist country. It's all about balance, which means that even when we came here and we didn't have much, like my mom was working her PhD, she didn't have a lot of money, we still lived relatively okay. It wasn't like we were very, very poor. Obviously I didn't have nearly as much as kind of my classmates, but it wasn't anything terrible, so to speak. And like now when I've grown up here and I go back to Lithuania, I just see the culture differences, and you can see that the living standard is reflected in the way people behave, I think, because I go to Lithuania and everyone is constantly negative in the way they interact with you, whether you're somewhere where, someone is serving you or whatever, like no one is kind there. And if I stay there for like 2 weeks, that starts rubbing off on me and I just kind of become sad and angry when I stay in Lithuania. And I think just because I grew up in Sweden, when I go back to Lithuania, even though that's where I grew up, it feels almost like a culture shock nowadays.
So let's briefly touch on it, and then we'll kind of go back. You mentioned like the Sweden politics a little bit there, kind of being something that is very different. And from the United States, like me being here, America, a lot of times people have a very negative connotation about Sweden politics. Could you very briefly kind of go over what is it like to live in Sweden for you? Like, what do you think about the politics there versus the other countries that you've lived in?
So I think Sweden is a good country to have a comfortable life, where I think it's sort of capped. You're sort of capped in terms of what you can achieve in a sense, because, obviously you're not exposed to the North American economy. And I think in North America, you can climb a lot higher in any given field. Obviously in Sweden, the more you make, the more you're getting taxed. Like if you're making a decent salary, you can get, if you're a doctor, you can get taxed up to like 55%. If you work overtime and you take that money out in salary, then that definitely gets capped at like 55%, which is insane. Which means if you are an expert in your field, and you climb that high, you go, well, why am I working here when I could be making 4 times as much money elsewhere, right? Yeah. So I think Sweden is a very good country to have a stable life. There's obviously health insurance, which you don't have in North America, really. So, so I think, yeah, it is what it is. You know, if you don't really care, if you're not really career driven, I think it's an excellent country to live in. But obviously, if you want to kind of be significant in the world, I suppose, or really, chase greatness, I think you kind of have to do it elsewhere.
Okay, I think that's a kind of good description of positives and negatives there. So kind of look at growing up in Sweden. What is the school system like there? What was it like for you inside the Sweden school system?
Well, at first I thought it was, compared to even sort of in the 1.5 years that I went to Lithuania, everything was way more strict than it was in Sweden. As soon as I came to Sweden, I'm like, first of all, I'm like, this is so easy. The stuff that you're forcing me to learn, I already learned like 1 year ago. So that was my first impression. And then after that, I think a big thing was that the grading system at the time when I was going to school, we only had like 4 different grades. Like you can fail, you can pass with distinction, or you can pass with whatever, very nice distinction or whatever. So basically, if you pass, there's only 3 grades, right? And think when I was used to a grading system from 1 to 10 in Lithuania, there's a lot more ways that you can get valued, you know? And I thought that also the fact that you wouldn't separate students as much in terms of their grades as you would in Lithuania, I think that kind of made it a little easier to kind of reach those milestones. So yeah, I thought the school in Sweden was pretty easy. Like I never really studied that hard, but I never had any issues with like passing with distinction and pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you'd mentioned is that like after the first year, after you kind of go over that like almost like anxiety hurdle of talking to people, that you would never shut up, you wouldn't stop talking, right? So were you a very popular kid in Sweden? Were you someone who got along with everyone?
No, I think maybe I was more so in Lithuania, but I think when I moved to Sweden, I definitely wasn't. I think, again, that experience probably made me have like a little bit of trust issues. Like I wouldn't really let people close to me, maybe because I had this subconscious sense that, well, maybe I'm just going to get uprooted again. And why should I kind of make a bond here that's just going to be painful to break? Maybe that's why. Yeah. So I think even up until now, I think I've kind of maintained that to the point where I'm kind of difficult to get close to. But when you get close to me, you know, I've had a lot of good friends say that the first time they met me, like, well, you seem like kind of an asshole. But then when I got to know you, you're an awesome guy, and it's literally like 2 different people, right? And I was like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I kind of don't try to waste a lot of time with people who I don't feel like I'm going to see eye to eye with. Just because, well, this guy's popular, should I kind of get close to him? No, I don't care about that. Is this a person that I could really get along with? Then I'm probably going to give that more of an effort. But I really never cared about popularity. I never was. I never was very popular. Obviously, like most, I turned to video games instead, and you know, it was that was kind of my calling, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've kind of noticed, and you mentioned kind of turning to video games, and that is something that I actually see very often with pro players, and you were a pro player for a while. Looking at, there's normally an age group, like a time period, like within an age where someone tends to get more into video games. And my experience generally is between like 14 and 17 are like the big years where people suddenly are not really that social anymore at school at all, and it's more about video games. Did you have a kind of moment like that where it was, oh, this is like a hard dive into video games, this is all I really care about, the social aspects don't matter nearly as much? Did you ever have a moment like that?
I don't think there was really a moment. I think I've always loved video games. I think my first gaming memory is sort of when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I wasn't really old enough to play, but I remember sitting in my mom's lap as she was playing, and I forced her to play Doom 1 because I was too scared to play myself, but I wanted to watch her play, and I was just watching like nothing else mattered in the world. And that was sort of my first memory, and I was always interested in computers and in games. And I don't really remember when we finally actually got a good PC, but I remember one of the first games I really got into, or the first two games were sort of Quake 3 and RuneScape, and those are the games where I just spent a ton of time playing. So I don't think it was a moment. I guess the moment was finally getting a good enough PC to sort of dive into it.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a point where you kind of stopped hanging out with your real life friends for video games, or was it just like
no, not really? Because again, I never really hung out with friends too much anyway, and because my friend circle was very small. Yeah. But so when I actually hang out with my friends, it was sort of with the same guys I still almost daily hung out with, like one of my best friends. And at school, we would sometimes hang out after school with some of those friends as well. It was just like I didn't have a large circle, but I still I was still social with the people that I was kind of comfortable with, or people that I liked.
Mm-hmm. And then one other question about kind of like school. How did you do as a student? You obviously went off to university to do journalism. Mm-hmm. What kind of student were you in school? Was there things that you were really good at, things you were bad at? Were you just all around good? You mentioned you didn't have to study a lot, which makes me hate you a little bit, but that's okay. What was school like for you in that aspect?
So like I said, in Sweden, it felt pretty easy. I think I was kind of talented, but I was also a little bit lazy. Mm-hmm. Or not really lazy. I've always kind of had the mentality of, if I find something that I'm really interested in, I become obsessed and I just commit everything to it, and I try to become the best possible at it. And if it's something that I don't see the purpose in, if it's sort of a subject where I'm like, well, what is this knowledge going to give me? For instance, physics. At the beginning of physics, I was very interested because it was stuff where, forces, how do forces work? And these basic things where I'm like, oh, now this explains this aspect. And then you go deeper and deeper into that field. And now we're talking magnetic fields and shit. And I'm like, well, how is this going to benefit me in my life? I'm never going to, because I know that I don't want to work within physics. Knowing about magnetic fields isn't really going to give me a lot of value. So I couldn't really bring myself to, give a lot of effort. So, but at the same time, my mom was a top student, one of the best. She passed with like medals or whatever in school. So she always pushed me insanely hard. And if I didn't come home with like at least the second highest grade, coming back with just a pass was completely unacceptable. That was like, you might as well not come home, right? So I think she pushed me to the point where for the subjects that I didn't enjoy, I did just enough to pass with distinction. And then the subjects that I enjoyed, English, I enjoyed, just languages in general, maths I enjoyed. Those subjects I kind of passed with top grades as well. And I think my average, when we turned it into points, my average was like 9.15 out of 10 during like upper secondary, which wasn't too bad. But again, I think I could have potentially done better if I really committed. But I spent so much time playing video games. I was playing Team Fortress 2 at the time as well. And to me, that was, and I remember in the first semester, I actually got top marks in everything except for one subject. And I was like, well, I can't pass with top marks in every subject over the next 2 years. The perfect score is ruined. I might as well kind of ease off the gas. So that was kind of how I approached it. I still tried hard, but I didn't, like, I just enjoyed games, I guess, too much, and I couldn't change my mentality at the time.
Yeah, and that's, you have to understand you're really young. Changing mentality when you are underneath a certain age it's actually really hard. Like, just because like the brain isn't fully developed and kids don't really like to think that they're wrong ever. Like that's really one of the huge things there. So I have to ask you, how old are you right now?
I'm 26, coming up on 27 in September. So very, very old.
It's okay. I'm 27 and I'll be 28 in January. So yeah.
Well, so it's always depressing when you're getting closer to 30 than 25. Yeah,
I feel that. I'm just kind of I'm reveling in the fact that I look like I'm 12 and I still get carded for rated R movies. So I'm just like, okay, I just don't age at all. So everyone else is screwed and I'm not. So kind of looking at you're finishing up school, right? And you're obviously doing quite well. You're playing video games a lot. Esports was not really a thing because we're close to the same age, and esports didn't really start to hit really popular to like my third year of college when League of Legends was like starting to like boom. So like that's not really a viable path that you're thinking. I don't think that, oh, let's do this. So you're going off into the world. You have to leave school. What makes you think I want to be a journalist, right? What is in your head that this is the pathway of life that I want to take?
Mm-hmm. So again, my mom really pushed me towards medicine. She was like, this is the only way you're going to always have a job. Your grandpa was a doctor. I'm a doctor, like a really, really successful doctor. So you're going to be a doctor. And I'm like, okay, I guess. And then I took this course in school before I kind of went on to university, was sort of a medicine basic course. And that was the first time I actually fell asleep during a lesson. And that was kind of a sign to me like, okay, I'm not going to be a doctor. And I was sort of considering, what do I want to do? And it was sort of between psychology, Spanish, some kind of languages, or journalism. And I was really interested in sports at the time as well. And I was watching, these experts on TV, and I was like, I could do that. I could be on TV and talk about these sports. Like, how awesome would that be as a job? And I thought, well, journalism is probably the way to go in that regard. So that's kind of how I decided to pursue journalism. And I also kind of wanted to get away a little bit and study abroad, see what it's like elsewhere, just kind of make a jump, try and be a little more independent when I was 18. So I thought, well, let me try and move to the UK, because when I moved to the UK, that was at a time where the tuition fees were still relatively cheap. Obviously, I could study for free in Sweden, but I felt like I wanted that experience, So I ended up applying that year, because the next year the tuition fees tripled in price. So I was like, well, this is the last chance. If I do want to study in the UK, like, I should go for it now. And there were a lot of good journalism. Like, everyone has journalism in the UK. I also wanted to improve my English, so I was like, okay, let's do it.
Mm-hmm. So up to that point, had you ever played in sports before? Were you someone who played in sports, or just watched it?
I mean, in Lithuania, basketball is really popular. It's like a second religion. So I played quite a bit of basketball, and I started playing when I came to Sweden as well. But it's one of the least popular sports in Sweden. We had two really shitty teams in the entire city. And when I went there, we had one practice a week, and no one really tried. Kids, basketball practice was somewhere where the parents send kids, because just so that they get to move a little, not because anyone wants to pursue basketball. It's just kind of a throwaway sport where, my kid needs to move. He's eating too much candy. Let him play some basketball. Kids just running around like it wasn't serious at all. And then I remember I started practicing during a summer in Lithuania. And obviously, because it's culturally more accepted there, it was like night and day difference. It was almost like army, like how competitive it was. It was like 40 guys, everyone's going at it. And I was like, wow, this is the competition that I enjoy. And I go back to Sweden and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore. I just saw how it's supposed to be, and this is not it. And I just kind of quit. But beyond that, I did some sports. I did karate for a couple of months, but that wasn't anything for me. And I think pretty early on, I just kind of quit on sports, even though I feel like I was very talented, especially in ball sports, like anything involving a ball, like football, basketball, tennis, all of that stuff. I was very, very good at, and I really excelled in school during PE lessons during that stuff. So I kind of regret a little bit, I guess, not pursuing anything in that regard. But yeah, I never really did that much sports after that. My passion kind of died down.
How did you maintain staying into sports, kind of watching it? Because one of the reasons that I actually am not huge into sports is because no one in my life growing up watched it, and I never played any sports. So for me, it was I don't really have any attachment to this. There's nothing there. There's nothing that even drew me in. None of my friends who I really hung out with watched sports either. So it was just kind of a combination of all of that. But when you talk about sports, you obviously, there's a huge cultural aspect in Lithuania, but you moved out of there pretty early on, so you would have been in Sweden where they don't view it. So what kind of made you pull to keeping in touch with sports?
Well, I think it is because it's culturally embedded in almost any Lithuanian. I still remember the days where, because you would watch Lithuania play, like a really small country that is still sort of ranked consistently amongst the 5 best countries in the world at basketball, and you get behind that as a fan, even when you're young. And I just have so many memories of witnessing these incredibly special moments, rooting for Lithuania. And I think that passion just never dies down. Like, it's embedded in you. And I think, football is a lot more popular in Sweden. A lot of my friends were into football. I kind of enjoyed playing it. So I just started watching a little bit, picked up a team, and then watched more and more. And I kind of got into that as well. I haven't really followed it too much, but like lately, but it was something that I really got into as well. And something that I got into even more when I moved to the UK, because that's a sport that's culturally embedded in the British people. Like everyone goes to the pub, every Wednesday and, Saturday, Sunday to watch their teams. Right. So I think that's kind of how it survived through the passion and the cultural aspect.
Okay, so now you move over to the UK, you're starting school, you're working in journalism. What was that like for you, getting into that?
So I was shocked about, again, how easy it was, or how, not necessarily easy, but how little you had to try or be in school. Like I had to be in a university for lectures, maybe 10 hours a week or something. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was insane. I was like, wow, I have so much free time. If I skip this one lecture here as well, then I only need to go to the university like twice a week. So I had an insane amount of time, like an insane amount of free time. And, I wasted a lot of time. I also started going to the gym like almost every day just to do something with my time. And I also started freelancing immediately, like when I was 18, 19 years old, because I felt, well, I have so much free time. Like everyone's out drinking, everyone's out partying, which you do as well. Like it's something that I did as well, especially early on. But then after a while, I'm like, well, I'm ought to do something to kind of separate myself from the pack if I want to be successful, because journalism is, it's kind of a dying business. The competition is fierce. I have to develop these skills that everyone already has when they come out, like try and develop a network, like do something. So as I just started watching a lot of sports again, especially the NBA. I started freelancing a lot. I wrote over those 3 years, maybe, definitely, I think over like 1,000 articles, everything from reports to opinion pieces to columns. And a lot of it was free at the time, just because I wanted experience. Yeah. Some of it eventually I got paid for a little bit. So that was kind of what I got up to doing during my studies. I just felt like I need to sort of build out my resume, at least as a writer, and I'm very happy that I did, because I couldn't waste any more time, or watch any more series. It was you kind of get restless after a while.
Yeah, so you're in there, you're freelancing, you're writing from that. Esports is starting to really get, I would say, popular. If you're anyone who's involved in the video games, obviously with League of Legends, starting to become popular, like really, really bigly after like 2010. There were obviously other esports before that. Were you paying attention? Were you watching these things? Were you someone who was interested into esports before this? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, So I was very much into Team Fortress 2. I played that competitively. Eventually got up to the top division, the Premier Division. Actually played with Taimu in quite a few teams. And after that, I got kind of burnt out on TF2 a little bit, and I picked up League. I played that quite a lot. I eventually, I think, climbed to Diamond 1 or something. And this was sort of around the time right before my move to the UK, and right around the time when I moved to the UK, I kind of stopped playing for a while, but then I picked it up a little bit again. I played TF2 for like a couple of months, and then I just kind of stuck to a League after a while. But the issue was I had a kind of a really bad laptop that was overheating. So between every game, I would have to put it outside, like next to the window, and let it cool off in the cool winter air for like 10 minutes before I could queue for the next game. But I was definitely paying attention. I was very interested in League at that time. I stopped playing as much, and I started watching more, because I felt like, okay, I'm covering sports, but maybe this is something I could cover too, in terms of like covering and being an esports writer, which is why I started following that. I didn't really do that. I pursued a couple of opportunities, but nothing really materialized in terms of writing about esports at that time. But it was something that I was looking into, and I thought, well, maybe I can try and be a content creator within this scene as well. But I was really so into NBA at that time, and NBA was just booming and growing so much. I felt like that's probably where I had the best chance to break through.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever do any articles that you're like, even like looking back now, you're like, I am really proud of this article. Like, this is the article that I am the most proud of, that really represents me as a person?
I don't know if there's just one. There were a couple of pieces that I I was proud of, especially like really analytical pieces that I still, I think I have stored somewhere, where I kind of combined like very good ideas and everything, but there's not one I think that kind of defines me. I think I just because I grinded it out and really wrote so many pieces, it was kind of a gradual improvement, and I think I'm more proud of that. Like considering how far I got and how much better my writing got, I looked at something I wrote like two years ago, at the time, when I was still writing actively. I looked at something. Oh, let's see, this I wrote 1 year ago. This is where I'm at now, and the difference was just shocking. I was obviously very lucky I wrote for Bleacher Report for a while. I was very lucky to work with some excellent editors who kind of took my writing to the next level. And so I think I was more proud of that development rather than just one singular piece.
So kind of looking at journalism, and the reason that I'm kind of like getting some of this stuff out there is actually I recently had Harsha on the show, and he actually was really big into journalism too. I was doing writing for Overwatch very briefly, but we kind of had a discussion there about like journalism in esports. Okay, which is kind of something I wanted to ask you because you were into journalism and you were doing tons of writing and you have a journalism degree. What do you think about journalism in esports? I'm not even going to limit to Overwatch, but we'll use esports as a whole.
It's hard to say, like I haven't really been paying that much attention because, the last couple of years I was a pro and then I was a coach. So I haven't really paid that much attention. I think the general sense that I got was that it was, even now, I guess it's not that well developed. I think it's at a much higher level now than it was a couple of years ago, but I think you still see, I think in general in this industry, all content thrives off clickbait and things like that, which is why I think it's hard to me to look at a lot of journalistic work and go, well, this is really good stuff. Like this is a good piece of good piece of journalism. So yeah, it's hard to say. I think ESPN obviously does serious stuff and some stuff that gets posted there. I guess it's kind of a little more on the professional side, but yeah, I think esports in general is just a lot more casual. It's not as professional because it's not on national TV. At least not all the time. So yeah, I think some catching up to do. I think it's just kind of it's just going to grow together as all the esports titles grow, I think.
Okay, because like when I look at esports right now and we look at journalism, it seems like there's almost no way. Like I look at all these different like publications that are out there, and my like number one question is like, how are you funding this? Like I understand the companies that are putting out TMZ clickbait. Like I understand that, at least that makes sense to me. Like, okay, this is what you're trying to do, at least to bring in revenue. But that is like the number one question I have for anyone who's out there is, and let's say you're someone who has their own platform. So you look at like Richard Lewis, for example, who just has his entire own platform and doesn't really need anyone else. That makes sense, but that scares me not having editors, but he's writing for Deserto now, so he does. But like that would be something that would scare me, is like an editor is someone who is really, really important to that whole journalism kind of outlook. And it seems that the only way to be successful in journalism is if you have your own platform or you work for ESPN.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think you either work for ESPN or you're a freelancer who's kind of built your own brand. And then again, then it's just, you're kind of your own boss, I guess. There's no one who kind of holds you accountable, I think there are obviously people who follow kind of the journalistic moral code, but I think there's always these paths you can take. Like you reach a point where, well, do I post this and potentially hurt someone, or like is this good for my brand, or is this and does this follow the moral code? And I think that's the key. If you're a true journalist, you're gonna try to follow the moral code and not always just chase after that clickbait, chasing the views and things like that. I think that's how you kind of last in the business, unless your persona is different and you're just doing different kind of contents. But then I think you're not a true journalist.
Yeah. That's something I've always said about like Michael. Is it Mike MYKL? Is that I associate him with example. Like a TMZ Cosmo. He is functionally that. He is not a journalist. He is just he's clickbait that people just want to watch, and I don't find that wrong as long as you understand that that's what you're getting. Like you're opening up Cosmo right now and you're trying to take it serious. Like, come on now.
Yeah, so, it's content creation. It's not journalism. It's an entirely different thing. And I think it's kind of blending together, and it's hard for people to separate the two. But yeah, I mean, that's just my take on it.
Okay. Is that something that scares you right now, looking at esports, the fact that there isn't a lot of journalists in here, and really it's ESPN. There's a couple others here and there who are freelancers, but is that something that really kind of worries you about esports, that there's nothing out there to hold esports really accountable all the time?
Yeah, a little bit, because I mean, that's a big thing when you're getting your degree, when you're studying. The big thing that sort of the lecturers say is that journalism is there to keep the society accountable, to work in the, in the interest of the people, right? And yeah, so I think it's definitely a concern, especially like now everything's getting a little more legitimate, but especially even before like Overwatch, before everything, like there was so much shadiness in the business, and I think that's slowly going away. But there's still so much shadiness, I think, going on behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, I am a little bit worried, and it's difficult to find a solution, because again, if you're not getting clicks, because there's no newspapers, because everyone has a very short attention span, they can't sit back and read a long article. They're gonna click on something and look at it for like 10 seconds. That's what you have to deal with. And if that's what you have to deal with, well, then you can't fund true journalists who can hold people accountable, who can do real journalists, where you can't afford to pay someone who's going to go and do an investigative piece for 2 months. And maybe there's a risk he comes back with nothing, and you've just paid him for 2 months to do nothing. There's no one who wants to take that risk. There's no one who can take that risk, because there's not enough attention still in esports. So yeah, I am worried, but I don't really see a great solution. Is just something that I think sort of our society is devolving into.
Yeah, but it terrifies me. But I don't know what to do. I don't have a solution. But it's an interesting thing to kind of bring up, and people should maybe care a little bit more about some of those long format pieces that people write all the time, because you might find something useful in there and not just be a low IQ human being. So kind of looking at that, you're going through college, you're working very early on doing freelance journalism. You're going through your degree. Esports is starting to pop up. Where does Overwatch come in all this?
So I moved after university. I moved back to Sweden. I was looking for jobs a little bit, and I just got a job in a casino, because that was something I was interested in too. Not casino specifically, but something that I did during my university studies is I played poker at casinos to kind of help pay for bills. It was sort of, instead of getting a part-time job, I just did that. So I was very much into poker. That was another thing that I, at the time, was very obsessed by. Like, I was reading books, I was studying film, I committed so many hours to getting good at poker. And I played to try and fund, so I didn't have to get a job. So I didn't have to get bigger loans and things like that. And so when I moved back to
how much money did you make playing poker? Did you accomplish that goal to where you actually didn't have to get another job? You were winning enough in poker?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I got some support from the Swedish government, actually, which is a little funny. But again, another perk of living in Sweden, they give you money to study, even though I'm studying in the UK. Swedish government is providing student support, which I guess pays off, because I returned to Sweden and I paid taxes. So in that sense, it works out. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really make that much. Again, like I was only playing. I didn't have a lot of success online because I was a huge tilter. But then when I played live, I was decent, and I was basically just making enough to kind of cover my rent and to make sure that I didn't have to. And again, my parents helped me a little bit, so I didn't have to take out more loans except for the tuition fees. So, yeah. And then moving back to Sweden, I was looking for jobs. I couldn't really find anything. Journalism is dead. There's nothing, especially since I studied in the UK. My Swedish language isn't really strong enough to work in journalism in Sweden. I had to look abroad, and if you want to go abroad, you have to get a visa. But I just have a degree. I have no experience. Like, it's impossible, right? So I went, okay, let me get a job in at a casino. It's still an environment that I think I'm probably going to enjoy. I enjoyed playing, at least. And yeah, I went into that job. I worked for maybe just over a year. And I think when I was I must have been like 9 months in or 10 months in when I first heard about Overwatch, that it was going to come out, and I saw a trailer, and I'm like, wow, this actually looks a lot like Team Fortress 2. It looks like a lot of the skills that I acquired through 5 years of playing at the highest level in Team Fortress 2. maybe I could transition that, even though I haven't touched an FPS title in a while. And even though I'm, at that time, maybe 22, 23, it's wishful thinking. But I thought, well, maybe if for nothing else, just for fun, because I missed the competition, because I had quit poker at that time. So I want to be competitive at something else. So that's kind of where Overwatch came in. I saw the trailer. I logged into Steam. I reached out to kind of my old TF2 guys, to Harry Hook, to Taimu, to just basically all the guys that I knew from back in the day, and everyone was like, "Yeah, we're moving on. Like this is probably going to be big. Almost all TF2 players are moving on." So I kind of tried to. I went like, okay, if I'm going to even have a chance to be good at this, I need to get into the beta. Yeah. So I was kind of pulling together some players, some potential rosters, writing these long presentations that I was going to send to our orgs, basically saying, "Well, look at this roster. Yeah, and obviously no one's played the game, but everyone thinks it's going to be big. We just want beta keys. Everyone's very accomplished in Team Fortress 2. There's a lot of transferable skills. Please give us beta keys, and then we'll represent you or whatever." And you just got turned out everywhere. Other players who kind of, and everyone just needed beta key. So initially, I think part of that thing, like I had Harry Hook, I had Taimu, but then eventually they hooked up with like Mitcher, I think, and some other people, so like people pros from other games, and they wanted them, so they gave them beta keys, so they got in, and then I had to kind of rework that roster, and then eventually we found this South African organization called Vytis, who were able to secure beta keys for us, and we signed like 9-month contracts just for beta keys, nothing else. And yeah, we that's how we kind of got into the beta, and I started grinding, and eventually I knew that working night shifts at a casino completely interrupted with the schedule. I saw that NVS is coming in, like these big teams are coming in. I'm like, wow, maybe there's some potential here. So I quit my job. I got a day job instead. I was working full time with that. I was still freelancing on the side. I was, playing scrimming as well. I was sleeping like 4 hours every day because you're working essentially 3 jobs. And yeah, that's how my journey started, I guess.
What did your mom and family think about this entire thing? Like video games, and then you leaving journalism. I imagine she was like, you should have been a doctor. You would have had a job. First of all, I could so see parents being like, man, if you would have been a doctor in Sweden, you would have had a job. But you ended up working at a casino, and then you quit the casino to play video games. Did you let your family know what was kind of going on here? What did they think about this entire thing?
Yeah, at the time I was broke, so I had to live at home because I came back from my studies like having nothing, just having loans. So at the time I was still living at home, trying to make back some money, and like trying to pay off my loans a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was just I was very unhappy at the casino. I hated working night shifts. I just hated that environment. And I was like, I just have to quit. And my mom was very against that. She's like, if you want to pursue this gaming stuff, do that, but you need to have a job at the same time. You have to pay bills, right? So because of that, I was like, okay, let me try and find a day job. And I just started working in a reception at a school full time, and could just quit the casino job so that I could work during the days, scrim during the evenings, and then basically, and then write during the nights, and then I have no time to sleep really.
So Overwatch is going out. Did you ever think about writing journalism for Overwatch? Like, was that ever a thought of like, you obviously went the pro player path kind of there and into a coach, but you have this journalism background. Overwatch is coming out. Did you ever think about just pursuing a professional career as a journalist in Overwatch?
No, not at the time, because the game, like, it was still in beta. Yeah. When we went pro, it was just as the game launched, but we were obviously, there was a lot of interest in our team. We were in talks with NIP, with Luminosity, G2, like a bunch of these teams that were interested in picking up teams. So it was never a case of, oh, let me see if I can break through as a journalist, because there was nothing to cover. Like, the game was just too small. The player base was too small before launch. And I saw an opportunity because we were breaking through with Vytis. I remember one of those ESL Cups against Reunited when we had some players standing. We had like, and that team broke up after that. We had like Sebosai, Nevix, IDDQD, bunch of these guys kind of standing in, and we beat Reunited, and I was like, wow, I can maybe go pro in this. Maybe I can secure a pro contract. And it took a while after that to reach that goal, but it was never about, let's see if I can become a journalist in this field, because there wasn't enough attention in the game yet.
Okay, so you're progressing along as doing this, working during the days and practicing and writing on the side. At what point you say, okay, I'm done with these other two things and I'm just going to focus on video games?
Basically, when I signed my contract, well, I had to actually tell the school if I was coming back for next year or not before I signed my contract, but it was looking good. Again, we had a lot of interest. We were either going to sign with NIP or Luminosity at the time, before NIP picked up the Finns. And that was basically when I did it, because I saw that I'm going to get a contract. It's not going to be hefty, but it's going to be just enough to get by. It's going to move us to a gaming house eventually. So that was kind of the time where I'm like, okay, now I have something else. I can pursue this full time. I'm not going to get rich off of this, but I'm going to accomplish a childhood dream of playing games for a living. That's insane. I'm going to live abroad and play video games. I'm going to travel around the world. Fuck the school,
Yeah.
So that was sort of the time I made the transition full time.
Okay, so you do that. I want to talk about getting into Misfits. What was it like getting into Misfits? Because you started off as a player for Misfits.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that experience like?
Yeah, so obviously with Luminosity, we were kind of we were underperforming for a while, and there were a lot of things in that team that I wasn't happy with. So a couple of weeks before my departure from Luminosity, I just kind of told the owner that we either have to kind of rework the roster because we're just not gelling after all those trades with Rogue and with Misfits, or you have to just remove me because I can't lead this team. And then eventually I departed a couple of weeks later. The teammates felt the same way. They wanted to split. So we end up splitting up. And then within a week or so, Misfits, one of the players, I think it was Zebo, contacted me and said that they were looking for a coach. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, maybe it's something that I can do as well, because even when I started out playing, and I played for as a pro for maybe 2 months, I remember I was sitting in on a scrim for another semi-pro team at the time, and I provided some feedback for them, and they were like, holy shit, this is incredible feedback. And that was the moment where I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'm good at this, maybe I'm good at the teaching part, maybe I can transition. Maybe this is something I'm going to transition to. And that was sort of when I knew that eventually I'm going to transition into that, which is why when I left Luminosity, I posted this thing where I'm whatever makes sense the most for my career, I'm going to be down for that, whether that's playing, whether that's coaching, whether that's kind of a journalism thing or whatever it may be. But I knew at the time I wouldn't join a team just to join a team. I was there not for the money, but to be a competitor and to win. So at that time when I departed Luminosity, there was maybe 5 teams in the world that I would have joined and played with. I didn't want to take a step back and just play for a paycheck, especially since I was already getting a lot of issues with my wrist. FaZe, Immortals, Misfits, those were some of the only teams I would have considered joining at the time. So I think Zebo contacted me and he was like, we're looking for a coach. They had just parted ways with their coach, and I trialed, and immediately all the players on the Swedish Misfits were like, we need you, please come. And then we negotiated a little bit with Misfits, and I didn't feel we negotiated and I felt like, okay, this is something I might be willing to pursue. It's probably safer than playing. And so the initial plan was that I was going to actually coach that all Swedish lineup of Misfits before joining as a player. But right before, or right around the time when kind of the buyout and everything like that from Luminosity was getting finalized, right around that time, Misfits just underperformed and lost in quarterfinals of this weird weekly cup to a team they should not be losing to. And at that time, they were like, well, maybe instead of joining as a coach, maybe you can join us as Lucio player, because we really need more leadership in that position. So that was kind of how it materialized. I was always going to join as a coach, and then sort of last minute it flipped a little bit, and they wanted to bring me on as a player.
Okay, so you're starting off as a player, and you obviously go through that. At what point do talks start to come up about you becoming a coach again?
Well, there wasn't really much talk. We played a couple of tournaments. We underperformed at Take TV. we went into Contender Season 0 knowing that this is the last chance we have. For 6 months now, the Swedish experiment has failed. If we don't perform at Season 0, this lineup is breaking up, and I knew that I'd be gone, especially since Sebo also had experience playing Lucio. He was sort of the team captain. He had won championships playing that role, so I kind of knew that if we don't perform here, I'm probably going to be out, and maybe I'm going to have to look at options. So there was a lot of pressure heading into Season 0, and we started really well. We immediately qualified, finishing top 2 behind United, who were very, very strong. So we had a lot of hopes to at least finish top 2, and then potentially maybe make the Overwatch League. But we did okay in groups, and then we went to the quarters and we just completely choked against Bazooka Puppies. One of the most depressing moments in my life. And then after that, I kind of knew it was over. Then they went for the rebuild. They kicked me, Rainforce, and Nevix. And after like a week, they asked whether I wanted to kind of trial as a coach as well. They were trialing another coach who actually took another. I think it's public knowledge. So Kirby was also trialing for Misfits at the time to coach kind of the new mixed roster with Zupa, Logi, and Swoosh. And I came in and trialed as well. I explored my options a little bit. I talked with some other teams, but it seemed like Misfits were going to get a spot. So I was like, well, if I can coach them well, maybe I can move into Overwatch League. This is going to be a nice, smooth transition to the next step of my career. So I trialed as well, and the players wanted to work with me. So they communicated that to the management, and that's how I kind of got on board and started coaching Misfits.
Okay, so the way you make it sound is it was almost a very bottom-up approach and not a top-down, right? So like if you look at Overwatch League now, a lot of times people are like, okay, the coaches are going to decide things, so it's very top-down, right? It's management, coaches, then players, and players have the lowest amount of say. At this time, it sounds like it was basically up to the players on which coach they wanted in a very bottom-up kind of approach there, as well as the fact that you had actually played with some of these players beforehand. Did that make the dynamic of being a coach difficult? Because when I hear it, like going off in my head, I'm just like conflict of interest. This would be like a huge issue of trying to coach a team that you were friends with. What was that kind of like for you making that transition?
So there's a lot of ways we can look at this, and I think it's a lengthy discussion that we can have both pre-Al and Al, and sort of the time after that. To address the first point, I think like almost every team was run from bottom up at that time. That was at a time where organizations were just they had 1 or 2 star players that they kind of let dictate things. If a player says I'm not going to play with this guy anymore, you have to make a move. You have to kick him. So that's how it worked pre-out. Like that's how it always was. So that wasn't anything weird. Like the players had to be comfortable with who they worked with, and even the management, when I interviewed with them, and kind of the manager / coach that was working with them on the side as well, felt like I was doing a better job. And that's like overall, I think they kind of chose me because of that. Now, when we started working with Misfits, there wasn't that many issues because we just had a really stacked roster for the sort of competition in Europe. Like we just picked a roster for the meta, basically. We knew it was going to be Tracer Genji. Let's pick Vic, one of the best Genjis in the world. Let's pick Logix, probably the best Tracer in Europe. Let's add Swoosh, teach him Winston. Add Zupe, probably one of the best, top 2 at least, flex support in Europe as well. So everything was just going very smoothly. We were performing very well. It wasn't difficult for me to coach the team at all because we were doing well. And I didn't really have to do big overhauls or anything. I think the team had pretty decent synergy from the get-go. We had a lot of star power, a lot of clutch potential. So really, I only had to refine certain things. The meta was also very stale. So I got to work a little more individually with players to try and polish so that they got better synergy. So with Misfits, that wasn't really that big of an issue. And, we did very well. We went, I think, was it 27-2 or something in maps. We lost just 2 maps. in the entire online stage. Obviously, we had a lot of nerves on stage in the finals, and we ended up losing 4-3 to Giganti. We underperformed a ton. But beyond that, like that period was still relatively successful, and I didn't have that many issues. But also, I was very raw. I think at the time, I wouldn't really classify myself as much like the way I define head coach now. I don't think I was a head coach then. I think I was kind of a glorified analyst / strategic coach. You know, that's how I would classify my role at the time. At least how I view of what head coaching duties are today.
Yeah. So kind of looking at that, the Misfits make sense. Okay, you go through it, you finish playing against Gigante. You're looking at the Overwatch League, which I don't know if you had knew or not yet, whether you'd be accepted. I'm assuming you probably did.
Yeah.
And because you guys did well, I'm assuming that they were just like, we're going to keep you as head coach because you did well. Did you have a choice on the roster at that point? Looking at Overwatch League going in, was it your decision to keep kind of the roster going in? And then if so, what was your decision behind it? What made you go with that, if it was your choice?
Yeah, so I was consulted during the time, and I felt like the roster was strong enough. I think we showed a good result. We choked a little bit on LAN, but it felt like we could definitely shake it off. So that was kind of shake it off when we got a lot more games under our belts during kind of the league stage. So I was happy with the roster. I think we could still go into the league and do damage with it, but there were some issues that were kind of exposed within the team. And I did want to add more players, maybe 2 more players before we headed into the league. And so I was happy with the roster. I did have a say in terms of, they asked me, do you think we need to change anything? What do you think? And I was like, yeah, everyone's doing pretty well. We showed a good result at EU Contenders. There's, I guess, no reason to believe that it's not going to hold up or that we won't be able to perform there. But there are these issues, and I think we need to address that by getting these substitute players or add competition in these roles, because that's going to help us get better, and we need kind of insurance over here. And so I wanted to get two more players before the season started, but that never really materialized.
Okay, what happened with that? Because I've had on a few Misfits players now, or previous Misfits from season 1. So I've had on Manitin, Swoosh, and Logix. Okay, so I've had all 3 of them on, and they all have different kind of perspective. And that is an important thing that I'm going to clarify right now, is that their outlook on everything that happened with Misfits is their perspective. And that's kind of why I do the show, and that's important to realize, is this is kind of a show based on the individual's perspective. Does not mean it is true. Okay, so it's very important to caveat for people out there. So what kind of happened going into season 1 where you couldn't get these players that you wanted?
So I think this was documented. I'm pretty sure the management posted a video of this kind of explaining their thought process, admitting that it was the wrong thought process, but it was the thought process nonetheless. Was that, it was Misfits was an org that was experienced in League of Legends, and they had very bad experience with subs, like having subs. And I guess they didn't realize how important it is to have subs in the Overwatch League, because that wasn't sort of the standard that the organization was used to in other esports titles. So because of that, I think the mentality was, okay, we're just going to head into the league with these guys. Obviously, they're coveted guys. It's gonna cost to lock all of them up. They're not going to be cheap, and we're just going to sort of roll with this, and then add as the season goes. Like see how it goes, and then add as the season goes along. Which, from their point of view, you can see the thought process, considering the experiences. And I think that was, in hindsight, obviously a huge error, but at the time you kind of understood it. And I was a little, I was a little disappointed, because I really wanted to add 2 specific players at the time, but it didn't happen. I was like, okay, that's fine. I think we can go into the season, and we can probably do damage with this roster and see what happens.
So another question that I have for you then, did you ever think about adding more staff? Because you mentioned the League of Legends, and they obviously, Misfits is a fairly big brand in the LEC now. And staff, I fully agree. I get the logic behind the players, right? Like in League of Legends, we don't use subs. The way that the game is based, subs aren't, I don't think, as useful. You see them starting to become more useful now, kind of. But at the time, I could totally get that kind of logic. But one of the logics I cannot grasp to this day is staffing, because the League of Legends team definitely has more than one coach. And they know for a fact that having more staff is useful for League of Legends. What happened on the staffing aspect? Because you guys didn't pull more staff in till later on in the season. And even when you pulled Koreans in, it was from some of the people we've had on the show, it was like 3 or 4 weeks later before you even got a translator. So explain to me the staffing aspect.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I would probably guess that it might have been the same, like maybe the org was suffering from like the same complacency where that kind of carries over from the roster decisions and the fact that we performed very well. And well, we have a winning formula here. Why do we need to add to it before there's a need to it? You know, we have a strong head coach. He can do a lot of things. So I don't think maybe, you know, it's hard. At that time, it's also hard to find staff, like people who are good at their job. So I suppose that was kind of the mentality, maybe. I'm not sure. And I didn't really push that hard for it either. I didn't understand. I personally didn't understand how much work it would be. So it wasn't something where I was like, I need an assistant. I need this and that. Because I didn't know what it required to be in the Overwatch League. I think no one really did. And that's why you see, I think even a team like NVS, you know, they were also severely understaffed. I think I'm pretty sure they also went into the season with just Kaika or maybe like one analyst on the side, but I'm pretty sure at the beginning of the season, Kaika was also kind of on his own. And I think if that's the case, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the case, I think that's also reflected in the same mentality where NVS was like, well, we just absolutely rolled through NA contenders. We are Apex champions. We did it with this structure. Let's just trust this structure. Let's not think about how we can get ahead of problems. Let's not think about how we can build on it. You know, how do we maintain this? Okay, we're at the top now, but how do we make sure that we get ahead of problems? And I think maybe NVS suffered a little bit from that, and I think certainly Misfits suffered a little from that complacency, I guess.
Yeah, I think I don't remember offhand. I'm trying to like remember back, like who did I actually talk to in Dallas at the time? Because like I was obviously with Gladiators. I feel like they did, but they might have added him on stage 2. It might have been stage 2 when they added people in.
I'm pretty sure that was the case. Yeah.
So kind of going back in and looking at Season 1 Mayhem, we've kind of got a chance to talk about like the different staffing going into it and how very realistically, you don't want to break something that's working, right? Like going into it, you were like, the formula is working. There's no reason to change anything. So, which I think is a very reasonable thing. No one knew what they were really getting into, I think, starting Season 1 of Overwatch League. At least at the very start. Okay, so the first stage happens. Okay, and I would say that at that point, we're starting to notice some things that are definitely unique to Overwatch League, and the fact that you have 2 games a week and you're practicing 6 days a week, and people are doing 2 to 3 blocks a day on top of like VOD review or individual practice. I can't imagine you being the only coach after that first month and being like, oh shit, I could do this another fucking 3 stages along with playoffs. Okay, I can't imagine that goes to your head unless you were suffering from some sort of kind of issue starting off right there. So what was after stage 1? Things are not going the greatest. What are your thoughts going into it?
So yeah, like stage 1 was, I think it can just kind of set the tone for the entire season. You know, I think like what other players on your show have already touched on was that we had to kind of commute quite a bit to the venue. So we had like very long work days. I think as far as our on-stage play, I think we suffered from a lot of the same issues that we did during the LAN of Contenders Season 1. And I think that's sort of the issues that kind of manifested themselves on the stage. And I think that we slowly worked off by the sort of towards the end of stage 2 when we started getting some better results. When we beat Shock, when we beat Valiant, when we almost beat Seoul, when we, I think, beat Dallas. We had a strong showing there, but it took a long time to build up to that. And I think mostly that was because, you know, these issues that I already saw that we were probably going to have issues with even before the league started really manifested themselves. And then also we like solving things just took way too long. Like I went into Overwatch League with this plan, like I'm going to do this and that, and everything's going to be like this. I'm going to make sure that like every single week, or at least bi-weekly, I'm going to be talking with every single player and making sure, right before the season I talked with every single player. I made sure everyone had personal goals. I talked, like sort of having an all-encompassing conversation. And my goal was, okay, I'm going to have that on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis at least. And I had all these plans set out, right? And then we go into the season and like, holy shit, there's so much, like we're commuting. First of all, the days are so long. There's 2 games every week, which is incredibly hard to prepare for, because you have to study so much film. You have to prepare your team strategically. You have to make sure everyone's, everyone's kind of in the right mindset. Everyone's up to snuff in that regard. So I think then I realized, okay, we're going to be in trouble. Like it's going to be so hard to solve all of these issues. And to me personally, and again, I look at that time and I could say, well, we lost because, or we're losing because like we didn't really have any management, or we didn't, we didn't have enough resources. We were understaffed. Yeah, like I could point at that, but like when I look back at that time, I think one of the biggest, not regrets, but something that I learned from, and that I think I could have changed, that maybe wouldn't have changed the results too much, but I think could have helped, was that I didn't really understand the duties of a head coach in terms of the way I see it now. A head coach has to look at the 40 problems that every single team inevitably has at any given time, isolate 2 or 3 most important ones, solve those first, and put everything else to the side. Mm-hmm. If you have enough staff, you can maybe do 5 problems at the same time, and you can kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Delegate for them to solve other things. But when I was in that position, because I was trying to do everything, I was trying to be the team psychologist, the strategist, the motivator, the psychologist, the scout. I should have realized that already at that time, because the same issues were kind of manifesting themselves from contenders. The players were kind of losing trust in each other. Mm-hmm. And if I was a good enough head coach at that time, I would have realized that, okay, it does not matter how well I prepare my team strategically. It doesn't matter how good my scouting reports are, how well we know the widow positions, how well we know exactly what compositions each team is playing, if there's no trust in the team. Mm-hmm. And I should have worked with players a little more one-on-one, I think, and put that to the side. And okay, we're not going to be optimally prepared. It's impossible to be optimally prepared. I should have accepted that fact a lot earlier and kind of isolated the most important issues. And instead, I think what I did was I spread myself super thin. I tried to cover all of those bases on my own, and as a result, I think I didn't really do a great job in any of them.
Yeah, and I think that takes a lot of courage to be able to accept like the responsibility that this is there. I have looking on the outside and having worked with gladiators, I do agree with your analogy that you cannot fix every single problem, and you kind of need to delegate, and that there's probably certain positions that are going to fix certain problems. Yeah. So like obviously like mentality stuff was something that I was aware of, and like gladiators knew any sort of mentality problems way beforehand, which is super helpful. Like knowing this could be an issue 4 months out is kind of a big deal. But kind of I do think that, but I think it's kind of, I have a hard time looking at you and being like, it was your responsibility. From the outside, it kind of looks like you were almost set up for failure. And like, that's what it kind of looks like being on the outside, is that maybe you could have asked for things, or maybe they could have provided things, and maybe it wouldn't have changed things, but it sure as hell wasn't like you were given the easiest load to carry the entire time. And coming to like the results that we see later on that we're going to kind of get into, and I would like to discuss, it seems like you were trying to carry the weight of the world on yourself that might have been slightly unrealistic. So
yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I tried to do that, and again, that's something I had to learn the hard way. And I think, I don't think there was a question there, so I guess there's nothing I can really answer or babble about. But yeah, I mean, it's you're right. I did feel like I had to solve everything. I was in charge of everything. But at the same time, ever since then, like because I got a lot of shit. I got a lot of hate. I don't think there's any value from a personal development perspective for me to put any more shit on Mayhem and say, well, they put me in maybe I didn't have the same resources as other teams did. But like I said, if I was better equipped or if I was a better head coach at that time, maybe it would have only changed like 5%, made us 5% better. But maybe that 5% is enough to kind of capture a little bit of momentum. And instead of us like going down the drain for the entirety of stage 1, maybe we get that wave of momentum and we get a couple of wins and the season looks completely different, right? And I think from a personal development perspective, it's just super unhealthy to go, well, I just had I was dealt a shitty hand. There was nothing I can do about it, So I choose to view it as, what could I have done better, And I think I failed on a lot of fronts, and I didn't have the tools, personally. I hadn't developed the skills necessary to handle those things. And I think the only way you can learn to handle those things is through going through those things. So yeah, maybe the situation wasn't optimal, but I kind of, I choose to look at it as an incredible lesson because I grew so much trying to kind of wear so many hats at the same time.
I think that's a totally fair assessment. Like, you will not grow unless you do take responsibility for that. I think that is totally 100% fair. So kind of looking at, as the stage progresses, you get through stage 1. Do you think about asking or bringing up, hey, we need more staff, like, immediately?
Yeah, so I was already asking for players and staff very, very early on in stage 1. And again, another thing that you don't know, I guess, or don't understand as an organization moving into season 1 is that it takes time to get the paperwork done. It takes time to get visas. It takes time to do interviews. All of these things take a lot of time, and so we started working on it pretty early on, but it just takes so much time to get the visas, which is why Sapis arrived so late, which is why, and the Koreans arrived so late, why everything took such a long time. So I think that's just, again, another lesson that in hindsight maybe you should have foreseen, but you didn't. You probably didn't expect things to go that badly that early, and that you would need to immediately intercept and to try and buy or look in the market for solutions. And
okay, so you're looking early on, you're going through stage 1, stage 2 goes through, you get through stage 2. How are you feeling at the end of stage 2? Because you worked part of the way into stage 3, but not a whole ton. I think like 2 or 3 weeks into stage 3, which I guess, considering the stage was only 5 weeks long, it's quite a long time. But you're going through stage 2. How are you feeling by the end of stage 2?
So I think right around the middle of stage 2, or maybe early stage 2, because at that time I was doing like I didn't have any days off, because during the days off I was just preparing for preparing like scan reports. So I was doing like 12 to 14-hour days, like almost every day without days off, through like 1.5 stages, or even more than that, because we had a lot of time, I guess, preparing for during the preseason and things like that. So by mid stage 2, and definitely by end of stage 2, I was just extremely burnt out. I started getting these really worrying symptoms where, while I was sitting, kind of the entire left side of my body would just go numb. Okay. Like the best way I could explain the feeling was if someone took like hot water and poured it under your shirt, and the water was like running down the side of your body. That's kind of what it felt like. So anytime I got the symptoms, I was like, wow, did someone pour water on me? And I was getting that like several times a day. It was coming and going. And because I had some issues with my heart when I was a little younger, when I was in my teens, it was obviously very worrying. But it did feel like a neurological symptom. So I went to a lot of doctors. We did a lot of tests, tested me for everything, and the conclusion I guess the doctor came to was it was just extreme burnout. And it was he couldn't really, because sort of my values were pretty good in terms of like my blood work and all of that stuff, so he couldn't find something that was wrong with me structurally. So he kind of just chalked it up to me being extremely burnt out. but obviously at that time I didn't have the luxury to really take a break. I think I started getting those symptoms even before Ryder came on, or anyone really came on to help. And I just had to kind of push through it. But obviously that was, it didn't really help my mental health either, because I was constantly worried about that too, on top of trying to fix all the things that were going wrong with the team as well.
Okay. What happened as a kid with your heart? You never mentioned that earlier.
Well, it wasn't anything big. It was just when I was a kid, I was abusing energy drinks. I was drinking like 3 or 4 every day. And then for like a year, I had these heartaches where I couldn't breathe. Like I couldn't breathe in at all. Or I would get this really, really sharp pain in my chest. Yeah. And that subsided eventually, but it took like a year or something. So because I had that, I thought, well, maybe this is the stress is causing that to come back or something. Even though it's a completely different symptom, I thought maybe that's coming back to haunt me, what I did as a teenager. So yeah, that was kind of the thing.
So you go into stage 3, you're working along. I don't think you had declared that you were leaving yet, that you were stepping down. You get Bart through. What happens that makes you say, okay, I'm stepping down?
So before I left, obviously the management was very well aware of my sort of physical and mental condition, because they were taking me to work to get these tests done. And even before, probably even up to a month before I left, or maybe 3 or 4 weeks before I left, they were saying, if you need to take a break, take a break. It's we see so much potential in you. We want to work with you moving forward, and we don't want you to just burn out and not and just kind of fizzle out. So which I appreciated very much. That the management gave me that option, even like a month before I left, but I didn't feel like it was an option. To me, with my mentality, I genuinely didn't feel like that was even an option. No way I'm leaving my guys when we're doing so poorly. I have to stay. I have to stick through it. That's the mentality I've had the entirety of my life, grinding in journalism, grinding in every single thing that I did up till this point. That's not how I got here, by just kind of leaving when the going is tough, and just because I feel bad. And I think it is it's healthy to a point where it helps you achieve goals. It helps you, this hyper competitiveness helps you get far. But if you don't consider your health, then you're not going to have a career anyway. It's very easy to run yourself into the ground, and that was sort of what I was doing. So I kind of politely declined. But then by the time I left, sort of the day that I left, that's when I just sort of hit a wall. I was already operating maybe at 20% of my capability, because I was kind of a walking zombie. Yeah. And there were things that were going on in the team that maybe triggered me just kind of breaking down. But mostly it's not one single event that led to it. It's just the accumulation of everything, the stress, the health condition, those worrying symptoms. Trying to figure out how to incorporate all the new players, the change in culture within the team, because now you're mixing your roster. All of these added, it is just problems just add up and add up. So it wasn't one thing that triggered it, but yeah, I just kind of, as I was operating at 20% efficiency, I felt like I wasn't bringing what I could to the team. I felt like I was kind of letting the team down as well, which is a horrible feeling, because to me, I felt like I was doing everything. I was sacrificing everything. I was almost physically dying, and we were still underperforming, and I felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I think if you put that kind of mental strain on yourself, you're just gonna break. Eventually something's gonna trigger it, and you're just gonna break. And that's, I think, what happened when I left. I felt like that's it. I feel like I have nothing anymore. I have nothing to give. And it was super hard to, and it wasn't something that I thought about a long time. I just kind of realized, okay, I can't do this, because if I continue for the rest of the season, I know with full certainty I'm going to be retired after this year. So I talked with John, the president of the team. Again, they were very supportive, as they were even a month earlier. I talked with Ryder. I really apologized, because I hated leaving him in that type of a position. So yeah, it was just really, really rough. And then telling the players, I just couldn't. I wanted to tell them. Just didn't want to disappear. I wanted to tell them what was going on. So yeah, I kind of told them, and that was really heartbreaking, but because I felt the support of the players as well, at least from what they said and what the body, like reading the body language in the room at the time when I told them, it did feel like they genuinely supported me and like they enjoyed working with me, and that just kind of broke my heart even more, because I felt like fuck, I'm leaving these guys when I really shouldn't, but at the same time, I just like it was that was almost a thing that added to the stress and the strain. The fact that it just goes against everything. It just goes against my mentality and who I am, at the core. In terms of like never giving up and things like that. And it felt like I was almost giving up, even though. From talking with people, like I had rationalized it. Yeah, like this is the right decision. I know this is the right decision. I have to make this decision for myself, but it just felt so shitty making that decision nonetheless.
Yeah, I've, like I said, I've had three of your players kind of go on the show, and what I will say about them is all of them have said that you are a good coach. There have been criticisms from different aspects and different looks, and I know that one of the players said that. Swoosh specifically was like, you know what? It feels like he really let us down. Like he really left, and it was for Swoosh specifically. It was very out of the blue. It was very unexpected for him. Like, and that's his perspective, obviously, and I think that that's fair. Like 1 minute you were there, and 1 minute you just kind of had left, and he felt like we're all suffering here. And I don't know if you've. Like how much, like one of the things that he talked about is actually like during the season, one of his friends had died, that he was really close to, and that like he was not winning and stuff. And then you left, and it was almost like a combination of those things, on him specifically, that was kind of like really hard. And he had felt, you were actually one of the people he recommended on the show too, which is kind of funny. He's like, what was his perspective telling his side of the story? And I think that that's not something that anyone can do very easily. I don't think like making that decision wasn't something like one day you're like, okay, this is easy decision. And I imagine that it must have stuck with you weeks after, like watching every single game. You're like, I should be there helping support these kids. And like, props to you for that decision, because I do think it was the best thing probably for you to do. I don't think it's an easy decision, and I think that it's probably one of those decisions where even looking back now, you're like, is there any way I could have made it so I could have stayed? Like, I can't imagine that you don't have that thought in your head. So kind of looking at it, moving forward, you decide to take this break and going through. I actually wanted to ask you a question, because Ryder has come out a couple times with a couple of your players. What was the process of getting Ryder in?
So we were looking at Saya player, and we wanted to obviously sign him, and we were looking to add another main tank. We were looking to expand the roster, and we felt like if we're bringing in Koreans, we need a kind of a Korean presence in the coaching room as well. So they were all sort of part of the same team, so we kind of took them, or like the organization took them as a package. I was very focused on the team. I wasn't really focused on doing interviews or anything like that. So the organization obviously hired him. The one player that I really wanted, that I pushed for, was Saya player. Because at that time I didn't have time to scout, so I didn't really know who the best talents are, but I knew how good Saya player was, and I really wanted Saya player on the team. And then it just kind of felt, okay, he's going to come. We want to make him comfortable. Let's bring in kind of the support staff that they had there. Meta Athena at that time was probably the best team in Korea, or one of the top 3 teams. So obviously they had a very solid foundation there. We're like, okay, let's bring in. Obviously Vol'jin also left and went to Dallas, so that team kind of got picked apart because they were so good. And yeah, like that's sort of how Ryder came in, and I think he did help me in the sense that I could maybe well, he helped me in the sense that I had someone else to kind of bounce ideas off, which was important. But at the same time, that was also very, very difficult because his English wasn't good. And through my entire stay until I left, we didn't have a translator. So it was still very difficult for me to communicate with him. And I was also in a position where, again, as a head coach, another situation that I had never experienced was working within a staff and kind of, handing out responsibilities. So it was difficult because I was used to doing everything. So I'm like, I wasn't very good at identifying, I guess, strengths and like, you can do this for me, you can do this for me, I'm going to take care of this. So maybe some of the stuff that we did like overlapped a little bit. I wanted him to come into the team and gain some respect. So I had him also contribute with some of the reviews while I did other stuff. And obviously that was hard because again of the language barriers. So that was sort of how Ryder came in season 1.
Okay. You mentioned respect there. And one of the things that I kind of gotten from some of the other players who were at Hunter is as the season went along, as things got worse and worse, and you even touched on it yourself, them losing trust in each other. But I had also heard that they had kind of lost trust from you a little bit, that people weren't listening, which isn't uncommon when things aren't going well. Is that something that you saw happening in front of you? Was that something that you noticed as well? Or from your perspective, was everything fine?
So I guess this goes back to the point of, coaching your former teammates, right? And I think that was definitely part of the issue. I think, again, when things started going poorly and the core of the roster is basically players who have been your peers, you were kicked from the team and they stayed. So in a sense, when you're in their situation, you can convince yourself, okay, I know better. We're not doing well. Let's try this instead. But now the hierarchy has changed and it's very difficult. It's difficult for everyone. It's very difficult for the players to respect that and just change their mindset. It's difficult for the coach as well because you care for those players as well, having played side to side and having like a different relationship with them. And I think it was, difficult on everyone. And it's hard. It's harder for me to make decisions because I can, I'm good at reading into body language. I can see when I say something, we're going to do this. And even though players might do it, I can read certain players' body language and they're not buying in. And if they're not buying in, then it means we're just going to try it. It's not going to work. And then we're going to move on to another thing without giving this an honest shot. And I do think, that was part of the problem. I think there were a lot of other problems, but, it definitely made my job a lot harder to work with players who I had played with for a really, really long time and known for a really, really long time. It was hard for me to sever like that relationship and separate it, and I think it's kind of impossible. I think that there's two things you can do. You either sever the professional relationship, which means you just split. One party leaves and one stays, or you sever the friendship, which is while you're in a team, you do that, and that kind of has implications on the results as well, because now, where do I stand? Like it's just kind of an impossible conundrum, I think, to navigate around almost, or maybe it's not. Maybe you can if both parties are like really receptive to it. They're very mature and they accept that. But I think in esports, everyone's young. No one's really experienced these things. I don't think you can do that, and especially when you're not dealing with just one person, you're dealing with a good chunk of the team. And I didn't really feel like it was like the majority of the team doesn't trust me. Like no one trusts me and no one does what I say. I don't really think that. I still think I had an impact on a lot of players. I think a lot of players kind of improved individually in certain aspects of their games. I didn't feel like it was kind of a mutiny where I had lost the locker room. I think I very much still had the locker room before I left, but I do see what you mentioned in terms of like it was very hard. It was much harder for me to make decisions, and maybe I didn't make the right decisions every single time because I was taking other factors in consideration rather than just 100% what's the best for the team. I was also thinking, okay, this is the best for the team, but this is going to have this type of an impact on this player, and then if that has that impact on that player, then that's going to lead to this type of an effect here.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking far ahead because I had already experienced, okay, this is how it's going to be like if I make this decision. It's I'm talking a little bit in circles, but that's kind of, I guess you can kind of get the gist of the issues and how difficult it is. And that's something I realized, like it's not something like I can't really do a great job anymore. I can do a good job, but I can't do the best job possible with perhaps those guys,
Yeah. Like if I would have been brought, like let's say that you had brought me in partway through your season, I would have actually said a very similar thing. That, hey, listen, one of these two things needs to happen. They either need to sever their friendship, and you need to put something to kind of replace that, which that's kind of what a performance coach does. Is they take that more, I'm going to listen to you and work through your problems. And that's a different type of relationship. It's not just like a coach. A lot of times, very much, you're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. normally put in a more respectful manner that is a lot more convincing. But like those relationships are very, very different. So you were almost taking on dual roles that you shouldn't have had to do, which is understandable. Like that, being in that situation, there is no good answer. Because I think that's the truth. There really is no good answer for season 1 Mayhem. Like there's no easy answer in order to solve all of your problems going in there. So
I mean, just to add to that real quick, I think. I don't want to. I suppose we're going to get to season 2, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But I think what you're saying as well. I think it's something that everyone has to learn. I think we go out of that experience and we're all better for it because we have learned this. We understand why it doesn't work. We understand why it didn't work out. And at least for myself, I know that I grew so much from that experience because I went in season 2 with a completely different mindset, and again, I listened to the interview you had with Swoosh, and he said, like, sort of when I came back after the season to coach the academy guys and try and build out our academy over the summer, he said I came back like a little colder, and that I probably reflected on these things. And I did. Like when I was back home, I reflected. I knew that's 100% the conclusion I came to as well. Like I can't coach my former teammates or like certain former teams because it's just too difficult on all of us, and it like the team suffers because of it, and it is just not a functional environment, which is why I changed my coaching style. I wouldn't say completely, but I changed it by a lot heading into the summer. That I kind of experimented with a different coaching style with the academy. Like when I try to help build out the academy and coach those guys through the summer and help them help the organization kind of develop pieces for the future. I experimented with that style, and it's something I went into the next season with as well. And I think, again, what we said, I think head coaching is a lot about isolating problems and knowing which problems to tackle first. And after that, a lot of it is about conversations, like sitting down with a player who has an issue and being able to solve that, even if they're in an agitated state, even if they don't see reason, having the ability to just sit down with a player and make him see reason, make him buy into what's right for the team is, I think, one of the most important things for a head coach. And it's something that I think I probably shied away from a little bit because of this dynamic in season 1, and something that I think, obviously we didn't have good results in season 2. Again, we're probably going to get to that. I don't want to dive in too much into that, but something that I am sort of proud of, and I think that I did a good job on compared to the first season, is these conversations, putting out fires, kind of immediately noticing when a problem is occurring, bringing the player in and having that tough conversation. I think, and again, it was super, super tough, even though I wasn't a friend of these players, And if you're a friend, then that conversation just becomes it becomes almost impossible to do, I think. So, yeah. Yeah,
I 100% agree. So kind of looking at, that does bring us into like season 2. You mentioned you brought in, you came in with this new sort of mindset, which you did, Susha even mentioned, is like he was a different person when I saw him the next time, which I think is good. Okay, I think it was something that was necessary going into this. So you go in and you build out the academy roster, which did very well. And which kind of brings me, you had this mindset going into the academy. You're starting to put together the roster for season 2 for Mayhem. Is your thought process the same? Because like everyone who like Yiska, Volamail, a bunch of other analysts and people out there who do writing have pretty much said that they were very confused with the season 2 roster. So what was your thinking going into the season 2 roster and building that out?
So we obviously, having sort of had a core, like building on a core, a full team from the first season, we had bad experiences with that. So we kind of just wanted to pick players we felt were talented and throw together a team. And in hindsight, like almost all teams heading into the season, out of all expansion teams, like almost everyone picked up cores and then built pieces around them. And that's how they were successful. I think Boston is kind of the only team that kind of went for a rebuild, picked pieces from everywhere and made that successful. But I think that speaks more to like how good they were at scouting and the coaches that they have. I think they have exceptional coaching staff and good leadership and all that, which is why I think they can make it work. So we went to the season also, or into the off season, basically just looking, okay, let's try and find the best player in each position who is also attainable. Because again, when you're scrapping an entire roster heading into a new season, you're dealing with multiple issues. You're dealing with obviously a financial issue in terms of you have to sign an entirely a new roster.
Yep.
You're competing with 8 expansion teams for the same players who, and those 8 teams are going to have a 1 month period when they can sign players and you can't.
Yep.
So you had to be kind of realistic, and so like certain players were maybe not attainable. They were going to be too expensive because you can't throw out 300 or 400K on a bunch of different starters unless you're, Vancouver. That's pretty much what they did. They invested that money. They're winning. London kind of did that in season 1, picking up 2 championship rosters. They picked the best out of them and they won. But unless you're willing to make an investment of several million, you're left to kind of maneuver around and say, okay, maybe this is where we spend a lot of money. Here we can maybe spend a little less. And can we get this guy, or is this guy going to be snapped up before even before we even have a chance to kind of pursue him or be in that conversation? If this is a guy that 3 teams are going to be interested in and going to be in a bidding war for, then we can't really get him, even if we communicate to him that we might be interested and we might give you an offer after the sort of moratorium or whatever you want to call it is lifted.
Yeah.
So you're battling obviously through a lot of hurdles, and we did trials. We looked at a bunch of players, and I think we kind of built out. I think the biggest issue was we didn't really have anyone scouting. I think it took a real long time for our management to get to where it is now. I think now the management is pretty well equipped in terms of the manpower, but we started so poorly in terms of like where our management was that we didn't have enough by the time off season rolled around. Because when the season started, I think kind of Swoosh mentioned that as well. Like we didn't really have a lot of management. Eventually, Matt came in, and he is like a terrific person, an incredible manager, one of the best managers I've ever worked with, one of the best people I've ever worked with. But at the beginning, he was kind of a part-time. He was still studying, so he was a part-time manager. He was with us like maybe twice a day, and beyond that, like we didn't have that much presence in terms of like having a general manager. And I guess to kind of share an anecdote, I'm digressing a little bit, but I guess to kind of share an anecdote. You know how there was this platform where every team would be able to access stats and overheads, right? Which really helps when you're scouting and preparing for games, right? You're seeing the overhead, you're seeing where everyone's rolling out and positions. It's much easier to dissect and prepare for a team looking at that footage rather than trying to look through the tournament feed. Yeah. So I didn't find out that we had access to that until maybe stage 3. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty bad.
Because obviously I wasn't included in the emails or anything. That's like those emails go to management, but I didn't find out. I found out from another team, and then I asked, and then there's this email from a couple of months ago. So that's kind of where we started. And I think obviously during when the offseason started, we were building up our staff, but I think Matt was still kind of a little bit on his own. We had Albert helping. We had some people, but we didn't really have anyone scouting during the offseason. We didn't have anyone really paying attention to contenders and going like, this is the guy we should pursue. So I think our scouting really lacked in that sense, because like I was in charge basically because I built our academy team, I was kind of in charge of the European scene. I trialed everyone in Europe, and I gave kind of my opinions on who might be good, who might not be that good. And then I obviously had a bit of I also trialed in North America. So those are the regions where I kind of knew where some of the talents might be. But in Korea, I had Korea and China, like I had no idea about any talents there, because obviously I had no time to ever watch any of that. Yeah. And Ryder kind of handled that, and he kind of isolated like these are attainable targets. Like this guy is probably going to be more too expensive, but these are potential targets as well. And I think that's really not something you should put on coaches. I think you need staff dedicated to prepare scouting. You're not relying on just a coach's knowledge in terms of the guys you look at, because I think out of the guys we looked at, we liked the players that we looked at, but maybe we didn't look at the right guys.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the issue. I think another issue is that we had every intention to be a mixed roster from the get-go. We kind of went it like half and half, but at the end we were like, okay, let's just pick the guys we think are the best, but we are going to be a mixed roster. We are going to speak English. So another important thing that we were looking in players was how good is this player's English?
Yeah.
Because we're not only looking at how skilled are you, like if say this player is here, but he has really good English, and this player is here, but he doesn't speak a lick of English. Theoretically, in a vacuum, this guy is a better pickup. Maybe he has a higher upside, but he's not going to fit in what we've decided to build. So I think sort of the fact that we didn't have, I think, good enough scouting, or maybe some of the guys were going to be too expensive, and because I think maybe we should have just committed either, okay, have maybe 2 Koreans and then the rest Western, or just go full Korean. I think we should have gone one way or the other in hindsight. I think that kind of held us back, and why the roster, I guess, it ultimately didn't perform, because we ended up with a roster with that is majorly Korean, with only essentially 1 Western player in the starting lineup, only 1 projected player in a Western lineup. And we force them to, or we get them to speak English, which is very unfair on the Western player. It's super hard for him. It's very unfair for the Korean guys as well, because it's so difficult, right?
Yeah.
So I think I think there were a lot of mistakes in the approach, both from the scouting and kind of the philosophy through which we ended up building the team.
Mm-hmm. So you're put in a very unique situation, because you might have had going in it like, oh, we're going to do like a split roster. And it ended up not like it was split in a very odd way that I have not really seen work, which is mostly Koreans and then 2 Western players.
Yeah.
Which at that point you had like, first thought is obviously, why have a Western coach who can't communicate? Because people do not seem to understand how hard it is to work through language barriers.
Yeah.
It is hard. It slows everything down significantly. Like if something would normally take 5 minutes, you're probably taking 15 minutes to explain the same concept just through translation. And that's hoping that your translator actually understands the concept that you're trying to deliver. Okay, because if they don't, it's going to be worse. So you're in this odd situation. I can't and obviously very quickly you guys made a decision to swap full Korean. As soon as you start getting into the stage, do you know that this is probably what's going to happen? Like you get in the stage, you have mostly Koreans, only 2 Western players. Are you looking at yourself like, there's no way this is going to work? We need to do something like immediately. I need to step down and find someone else.
So there's a lot to dissect there. I guess we can start with, ending up with a majorly Korean roster. So the way it was communicated from management down to me was that heading into the season, me and Ryder were essentially going to be co-head coaches. Like I would maintain the title, but we would essentially be the same way the Philly is doing it with Named and Hayes. Like that was going to be the same structure the Mayhem had. So that was what management communicated to me. So I felt like, okay, me and Ryder are on the same level. We have the same say. And we kind of went into the trials, and we felt like, a lot of the Koreans that we liked, that we felt were really good players. We felt like they were better than their counterparts, or they would fit better with the team or around the key players that we wanted to build around. I don't even like, Ryder had some reservations about us having too many Koreans. And I felt like, well, as long as they can kind of speak English, maybe it'll be fine. And then, but then in hindsight, there were also some players where maybe I wasn't 100% sure about, and I thought, well, maybe this counterpart would have been better, but I maybe didn't push hard enough for those options, which is also on me. But again, I don't feel like those decisions should fall on the coaching staff. I think obviously you have to convince your head coach and your lead assistants or whatever of this, but you have to have that trust. A very good, interesting conversation or quote that Greg Popovich of the San Antonio Spurs said. There was one guy who he saw him practice and he was like, no, this guy's not good. And then the GM was like, no, trust me, I've seen 10 times more of him, and I agree this was a bad practice. Just give him another chance. He gave him a chance. Okay, when are we signing this guy, right? I think you can't rely on just coaches doing that type of scouting and then looking at just the trials and making decisions off of that. I think it's very, very difficult to do that. And I think because of that, maybe I should have pushed for certain players. Maybe we should have, obviously seen the issue coming. There were certain players. There were actually certain players, Western players, that we were also interested in or wanted on the roster. Like I especially wanted on the roster, but that got snagged up before we had a chance. So that obviously went off the table. So we ended up with kind of getting the. That's what we kind of end up with almost a full Korean roster, and naturally with us being co-head coaches, or like that's how the organization said that it's going to be. When we end up with a Major League Korean roster, I kind of ceded a lot of control to Ryder, because naturally it's very inefficient for me to do reviews. Have that go through a translator that goes to the players. They discuss. They combine. Like it's just so much time wasting. So it was much easier for like me and Tvik, especially during the boot camp, to sit with a translator. They're conversing and reviewing, and they're feeding us the conclusions. Or our translator Alice at the time was picking it up. She had a lot of experience. She's an exceptional translator, and that's how the workflow worked, I guess. And then when I would do reviews, it would be, sort of to begin the day, something I had prepared. So it would be stuff that I've already written out. I have come to these conclusions. Most of it, like, it's not really going to be up for debate. Maybe something the players are definitely going to ask questions. Maybe there's going to be some discussion, but generally there's not much discussion, because I've really dedicated a lot of time to preparing this feedback. Where like, these are the goals. This is what we're going to do. These are the aspects we're going to focus on. Look at how these teams are playing this. This is your and then just kind of do that for 30 minutes. And that's sort of how the roles got split up. But then obviously when we came back to North America and Ryder departed, then I'm all of a sudden put in a role like, now I am the sole head coach and I am in charge of everything again. And that's when I was like, okay, shit. Not like now that's difficult, because now I have to do reviews. We don't have anyone who can do reviews as well, and who can cater both to the Western players, make sure that they're not neglected, they understand everything, that I, as a head coach, understand everything, because otherwise I'm not going to know what conclusions they reach. Like, everything has to be approved by me, otherwise, who's leading the ship. And that was tough as well, because then reviews are taking so long, because again, the same thing happens where it goes in a circle. So that's sort of when I realized it was going to be very, very difficult. I realized also we needed to change the structure somehow. We needed to bring in other coaches, like another Korean coach who could help and measure the pulse of the team. Because again, like, most of the conversations happen in Korean. I can't really, as a head coach, judge a player's, like, all how some Korean players are. Like, they might be loud, and we might interpret that as, oh, are they being toxic? Are they being aggressive? But they're just being loud, and it's funny. So it's very difficult to stand in and police when someone is misbehaving or there's a problem, which is something I realized as well. Like, I started getting a sniff of problems way too late. Some of the things, again, what I said, I think a head coach needs to get ahead of issues, isolate them, right? But if I can't identify those issues, which I felt like I couldn't really do with a full Korean roster. There were things where I would find out like 2 weeks later, well, like, this player is doing this, or like, he's talking in this tone. I'm like, why was I not made aware of this before? And then I can bring in and try and solve it. But now maybe that issue has brewed for two weeks. Someone's already frustrated. It's affecting our performance. And it just felt like I could not do my job. I'm like, we need to bring in someone who is a Korean. So I think, I think it was, it was partially that. I just realized, okay, we need to go kind of in a mixed direction, or we need to, have a Korean takeover. We have to go full Korean. We have to do something drastic, because the culture clash was just too massive. Either you're going to have Koreans who are just completely unsatisfied with the way we do things, or you're going to have Western players who are just completely unsatisfied with how we do things. And whatever you do, whatever solution you find, it's just going to be a band-aid. There's no way of solving that clash unless you go majority Western or you go full Korean. So, and I felt like it was, for me, it was just difficult because, the departure of Ryder happened that late. I had to, again, reinvent how I worked with the team. Even though we did eventually sign coaches, I had never worked with them. I didn't have a relationship with them. I didn't know how they would fit into the team culture. They also had to get visas once again. So even though we signed coaches, we didn't get them until maybe like towards the last couple of weeks of stage one. So we ended up still like we ended again up in a situation where it was basically me and S&T, who is a player coach, who I guess in that situation is going through the exact same things that I went through in season 1, where he just played with these guys. He was a teammate with these guys, and now he has to sever those relationships. And he obviously worked very hard. He really helped me, because anything I asked of him, he would do. But that was kind of what we had to work with. And when the stage ended after the loss to Washington, it was clear we have to make a change. And right as the stage ended, I talked with management, and I told them, we have to make a change. If we end up going full Korean, I could potentially stay in a lesser role and do kind of analytical stuff, but I don't think that's a role where I would feel like I'm getting the most out of myself, where I can really bring a lot to the table and continue to evolve as a coach. Because even though we failed last season, I grew so much, and I didn't feel like in this situation I would really grow. So we either go full Korean, you guys can go for a Korean coaching staff, and these cultural issues hopefully go away, or we sign more Western players, we go for more of a mixed roster, and we commit to this Western culture, and then we sign other coaches, like maybe some Western coaches, maybe move up some of the guys from Mayhem Academy, something like that. And that's what we build. Like, it's one or the other. But I told them straight up, if we're going Western, I'm going to stay, and we're going to see this through. We're going to fix this. If you're going full Korean, then I'm not the guy who's going to see this through, because I just can't. I can't do my job properly. It was really evident by that point. And you're just better off committing long term to someone else, and I'm better off trying to explore other options. Up until 1 day or 2 days before we were supposed to pick up practice before stage 2, I was under the impression that we were going to go. And again, I think this is public. I think McGravy already communicated this on his stream after the announcement. So I feel comfortable sharing this. I found out just 2 days or 1 day before practice picked up that we were in fact not going Western. We're going full Korean. So and that's something that kind of also made me very angry, because it's a decision that affects my job. It affects the entire team, and it's made very, very late. And it's especially since I already communicated my intentions. We're going for Korean. I'm not staying. There's no point in me staying, and kind of like that was already communicated, right? And so I wasn't too happy about how late that decision. I was happy with either way, because I understood the decision has to be made. I knew it's going to impact my job as well, but I cared about the players. I think whatever is best for them and the team, whatever makes the team most successful, I'm happy for you guys to reach that spot, So I wasn't. There was no ego. I didn't mind like giving up money or anything. But I just wanted a conclusion. I wanted a solution. I wanted a rebuild, and I think that decision just came kind of late. And that's sort of when I realized, okay, we're gonna have to part ways. And again, the organization was very understanding. I always felt like I was very respected within the organization. I had never had like, obviously there are things that I wasn't happy about, got a lot of things, but from a personal perspective, I really love all of the guys. I wish them nothing but the best. So it was a very amicable split. And the same thing, with the players. I think for the players, it was more of a shock, because again, the decision happened very late, sort of leading up to stage 2. And I guess I can talk about that day, because I went into that day when we were going to tell the players, and I was just, I was very. You're worried about yourself. You're worried about your future. You're worried about the guys. How are they going to, like, all these things? You're a little frustrated because the decision is being made so late. And I left that day feeling, I guess, more fulfilled than I have in a long time, because when we told the players, like, obviously they were shocked. They were shocked, especially because I was leaving. They completely understood. But after that, almost all of the Korean players actually, came up to me separately, or like by twos, and were like, first of all, some of them were worried, like maybe there's something with my health, maybe that's why I was leaving, maybe something got lost in translation. But I assured them, no, like this is why we're leaving. It has absolutely nothing to do with you guys. It's because of this decision. It was communicated before, and I kind of laid it out for them. And I just genuinely felt the love. And that was the most shocking part, because I was working with Koreans. I was working with players who I wasn't friends with, who almost all of them I had really strong conversations with one-on-one, where I pushed them, where I might have yelled at them, where I wasn't happy with what they were doing. And practically all of them, came up and they were like, shit, you taught me a lot. I really appreciated. Some of that have kind of had tears in their eyes, and especially the guys who I worked with for a long time, they were just like so thankful, and like genuinely felt that gratitude, and it made me feel a lot more gratitude to like having been able to experience that, be part of something like that. And it made me feel like, even though, because when you're in that situation, it's very easy to start questioning yourself. I failed season 1. I failed season 2. We failed to qualify for BlizzCon with Sweden. Like everywhere I went, ever since Misfits, we've just failed. And there's only so many times you can go, well, it's the organization's fault. It's this or that. It's, you have to look within. It's hard not to lose confidence. But I felt like after that day, when that's how they reacted from what they communicated to me in those conversations, it felt like, well, maybe I did do something right. Maybe I did leave an impact on these guys. And it's also something that kind of helps me rethink everything, because rather than looking at myself as, oh, this loser who hasn't accomplished anything, I look back at the whole Mayhem saga as, I learned a ton from both my mistakes and the organization's mistakes. And ultimately, I feel like I managed to have an impact on even Korean players, despite this language barrier, despite everything. I felt that. I felt something I didn't feel with a Western roster even, and to me, it was kind of a sense of, okay, I learned from season 1. I learned that I have to have these conversations with players, and even though they're hard, even though they might not like what they hear at the time, if I can kind of, sort of take out that fire and put out that fire, rather, they will gain respect for you. And that's kind of what I learned. And these are the things that I think I shied away from a little bit during season 1. And I definitely did in season 2. I would have felt guilty if I didn't immediately, I feel like, oh, this player is not performing. He's not talking. He's clearly frustrated with something. I need to bring him in. I need to talk with him. Like, these were the things I didn't do enough in season 1. And that I think I really did a good job of in season 2. So, I kind of rambled on for a long time, but that's kind of the whole journey, I guess, up until this point. And I do feel like coming out of that situation, I was happy, even though I failed a lot. I feel like I learned way more in this 1.5 years than I have for the last 20 years of my life before that. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I think that there's something to be said there about, like, you mentioned that before you had more of you had this friendship bond between people, but this was mostly just mutual respect. It was professional respect. And I don't think a lot of people realize that you can have a professional respect where people still care for each other. And that when someone leaves, you're still sad because you respect them so much. It's a lot different though. It's not just friends. It's this level of respect that is unacquired in a lot of other ways, that is very hard to replicate any other way. And I can totally see that, them being like, wow, this person has taught me a lot. He's been here. He's been professional. And seeing him go is going to be a loss. And I think that would be really hard.
Yeah. And I think just again, to add to that, sorry to interrupt you. I think what you're saying is just 100% true, because when the reaction is sparked out of respect, and again, it's sparked out of respect, but it's also coming from players who would theoretically have a reason to dislike me. Players who might be benched, who might not be playing all the time, players who I have yelled at, or really, at times maybe been really, really hard on because I feel like they weren't, doing their job, or they were kind of letting out their frustration on someone else, and I had to fix that. There were a lot of players who I had those conversations with, or players who maybe feel like they didn't get a good enough chance to prove themselves or whatever, and they still came forward and had that reaction. To me, that just meant so much, because again, they have every reason from an egotistical perspective to dislike me. But for them to come out and kind of give me that type of a send-off, it really felt special. And I think, like you say, it's just sparked out of professional respect, and it's only built over time. It was built during the boot camp, during our struggles through stage 1, through everything, while I was there. And it was something special.
So you end up stepping down and leaving. And one of the things you actually mentioned on Tactical Crouch is that you actually had offers for either a Contenders team or Owls team. What made you not take any offers afterwards?
So obviously, having gone, even though, again, I'm very self-reflective and I'm self-critical of myself and I try to look to improve, I also understand that, maybe I wasn't put in the best possible situation, especially when I look around the league and I hear how how well-equipped some other teams are. I feel like a priority for me if or when I return to the Overwatch League is I have to, first of all, be very comfortable with the management side of things. I have to believe in the culture that they're setting. I have to believe in the coaching staff because if I'm coming in, I want to be able to. I do think I bring a ton to the table in terms of my experiences, and I feel like I'm versatile enough to fill virtually any role in a coaching staff. But I want to have coaches that I really respect, who I can learn from, who I can, because I was kind of understaffed and working with like maybe one assistant for maybe like 98% of my tenure with the team. Or with Florida, I never really, like, most of the things that I learned were through trial and error. I didn't have a chance to kind of really absorb knowledge from someone else. And that's something I kind of miss, because even as a player, I never had a coach. I never had someone to look up to. So everything I learned up until now is just trial and error. And that's a very important thing that I think a team needs to have. So I want to make sure that I land in a situation where I'm happy long term. I'm not looking to jump teams and do that type of thing, because if you think about it, over the last 3 years, I've been with 2 organizations. So, I want to be somewhere where I feel like I can call home for a long period of time. And ultimately, I think it's difficult to find that mid-season, because that's the thing. I'm not going to just sign a contract and go back into the league just to coach and to be in the league. I want all those things to be there. The same way when I left Luminosity, there was maybe 4 or 5 teams that I would have joined as a player. I feel like I'm sort of in the same situation as a coach now as well. I don't want to go from kind of one dumpster fire to another, so to speak, if that makes sense. Yeah. I want to be part of something special and help build something special. And I think it's just difficult to, generally it's just difficult to find that mid-season. I had offers, but at this time, I guess it's difficult because it doesn't I want to maintain flexibility to make sure that I can see how things transpire during the off season. I want that flexibility. That's one of the kind of demands I have as a free agent right now. Mm-hmm. But from an organizational standpoint, it doesn't really make sense to pay for my travel, pay for my visa, pay for all of these expenses if I might essentially only be a rental for the rest of the season, and I might leave during the off season, Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I'm not willing to commit to the end of this, basically to any team. I'm not willing to commit for the rest of this season, and then the entirety of the next season when I don't know how the roster is going to shake up. I don't know what the coaching staff is going to look like. I don't know anything. I don't know what direction that franchise is going to go in. So to me, it's a big commitment, which is why I really only commit for 1 year at a time wherever I go. And I think that's basically the biggest hurdle to overcome, and that's where kind of the interests of the teams that were kind of sniffing around or were interested in me, and teams that I kind of had discussions with. That's where I think the biggest clash is, which is why I think if I do return to the league, it's probably going to be at some point during the off season when there is a bigger shuffle, where more teams are looking maybe to restructure and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm at, and why I'm committing to kind of a different craft now while I sit out and kind of enjoy the league from the sidelines.
Yeah, so now you're doing content creation as well as coaching. You're doing private coaching.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of mentioned that you're not opposed to going back. Do you want? Is that something that you really want to do, or because realistically, if you're going to pursue both avenues, it's going to be very, very hard. Doing content creation and being a professional coach, right? So at some point, you're probably going to have to make a decision, which one do I want to do? Right now, is it leading towards just doing content until you find a team, or do you just want to do content full time?
It's difficult to say because I'm sort of in a situation now where I'm doing content. I'm kind of enjoying myself. It's, and again, a new craft that I get to kind of utilize the skills I learned during journalism, but it's also something completely new where I feel like I'm growing every day. I'm learning editing. I'm learning how to stream. I'm learning how to put these videos together, how to kind of pack the game knowledge that I have and deliver it in an easy package to kind of digest to the audience. I'm really enjoying all of these things. Now, I'm in sort of a situation where I'm probably not like it just doesn't make sense for me to go back to the league net right now, considering the best teams are well staffed. There's no movement, right? So because of that, I'm kind of in a spot where I think I'm happy just doing content and covering the league for a couple of months, and after that, just really seeing what happens. I do kind of want to go back to the league. I do miss coaching. I do miss the competitive aspect. Whatever I've done in my life, I've kind of found a competitive avenue, whether it's poker, whether it's video games, whatever it is. I kind of miss that aspect. I miss being emotionally involved in the result of a game. So I do want to go back, especially since I've learned so much in the Overwatch League, and I think I have still so much to learn, and I still think I have so much to bring to the table. I do, even though my public reputation might not be great, I do believe my reputation within the league is a little better, and I do feel like I could bring a lot to the table that maybe other people can't, because I just have such a long history in the scene. I have so much to bring to the table, and I do want to continue to using those skills, especially considering how it ended with Mayhem. I do feel like I have kind of unfinished business. I feel like I want to be part of a successful team again. I really miss it. The period we had with Misfits contenders, that was one of the happier times of my life, because it was like all this hard work that I'm putting into it. We can see the results. So I do miss that. I do kind of want to go back into coaching, but again, I'm not opposed to doing journalistic stuff. I'm not opposed to doing content. I guess it just come down to how things break out. If I end up being successful as a content creator, maybe there's an offer to kind of work in broadcasting. I would love that. I would love to be part of the broadcast as well, because ultimately, like I said before I went to university, that was kind of the dream in a sports realm, to talk about sports, in this case to talk about esports, to break it down, to kind of again share the knowledge with the audience and share that passion. That's another way you can kind of, it's not a competitive way, but it's another way you can convey the passion you have for the game to a wider audience. So it's something that I would enjoy as well, I think. So I guess it's just going to depend on what opportunities are there, what I think is best for my long term of my career. But yeah, I do miss coaching. I feel like I can do a good job if I do get another shot with a good team, with a good structure. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. So thank you so much for being on the show. So far, it's been enlightening. I actually have only one question for you that's left. Arguably the hardest question, depending on who you are. But I just wanted to thank you for taking the time. I think it's been really enlightening, and you're an amazing human being. Like, I really enjoy getting to talk to you. I love doing this show because I get to meet people in a way that it'd be like the same thing as if we were out getting drinks and I was meeting you. This would be very much the similar way, because this is the person that I am. So I've enjoyed it so far. But the last question that I have for you, you've had the experience of being on the show. It's kind of unique. Not many people do a show that is like this that I know of. That being said, if you could see anyone on the show, who would you pick? They have to speak English and they have to be involved in esports. That's the only criteria for it.
That's a good question. I don't really know. I think it's most interesting to talk to people who have been through a lot or have failed a lot, because that's when you kind of get the best stories. I don't think it's very interesting to talk about someone who's just always winning. It's just it's just part of my DNA, whatever. So I think I don't know if I can isolate one person, but I guess someone who has failed a lot would be interesting. Maybe actually someone who would be interesting would be Wizard Young, because he I think, again, from the outside looking, I don't really know Wizard Young that well, but from the outside looking in, it feels like he went from being so highly regarded to people disregarded him completely because of the poor results of Washington. And again, I think the truth of his competence, or wherever he is, how good he is, I think it's somewhere in the middle. I don't think you can judge him just off NIXL. I don't think you can judge him just off of Washington. But he has had that had that rocky journey, which is I think where the best stories lie. I think that's where there's a lot of interesting experiences to talk about. So yeah, maybe he'd be an interesting test subject for you.
A test subject. That's the way we're describing this show. Well, everyone, if you want to be a test subject on my show, Wizard Young it is. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I don't normally do shout outs, but if you want shout outs, you're more than welcome to have them.
Yeah, not really. I mean, just I guess follow my content, give me feedback again, just like you did when I was an Al coach. Just pour all the shit on me. I'm gonna try and take it and get better from it. So yeah, you can find it on Twitter, you can find it on YouTube, and yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Shout out to you. It was a fun conversation. It was fun to kind of vent and talk about things a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a blast. I want to thank you so much, everyone. Mineral on the show, thank you so much. This has been Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.